On today's show, I'm going to be talking with Doc Fall. I know him as Doc. I think on his records, he's Dale Fall. I think he's also known as Brian in some other states, but we won't talk about those outstanding warrants. He was the lead singer of Dead Vampires and probably still is. And he also, after this, very, I think, progressive, trend-setting horror rock band in Seattle. After they made a splash, he put out a solo album called, drumroll please, Look What the Devil Made Me Do, which I really, really like. And I think he's been able to transcend horror rock, punk, rockabilly, kind of cross genres. And also just, I think, has a lot of opinions on a lot of things. So we're going to talk about his past, his future, and I just want to really pick his brain on just the state of the art of music and why we should still care about it. So welcome to the show, Doc.
Thanks for having me. And it's funny you mentioned all my names on this show because you know what's really funny is when you get into a room with people who know me by one of those names. They're like, "Hey Brian, why are they calling you Dale? Who's this Doc guy, by the way? And why are they doing that?" Basically, I failed at my name. I don't know that if there's anybody that's ever done that in the history of the world. You know, you're given a name. How can you screw that up? I did.
Well, to me, you're like P. Diddy. You know, one year you're Puff Daddy, then you're Sean Combs or Sean Puffy Combs. And so basically you should be a rapper.
Yeah, I should have. I missed my calling. I should have crunked it up instead of putting makeup on my face and gluing prosthetics at the weird hours in sleazy clubs.
I want to get a lot of sleazy club stories out of you tonight because you know what?
I have oodles.
You know, I've been doing this podcast and I love it. And I kind of bend over backwards to be respectful of people. But I never really, push people for the seedy stories. And I just have this sense tonight things are going to change. And like the dam's going to burst. I can just pump you for sleazy nightclub stories.
This is a R-rated, yes? This is a rated R podcast?
Oh, please me. Second graders are, hosting R-rated podcasts now. We're like, to them, we're like Disney, okay?
I don't think, I don't want to let you down. I don't think my stories, even can possibly come close to the stories that we've all heard of from roll yesteryear.
Oh,
but
yeah.
But you definitely, when you're in a band like I was in, something that I would like to call budget rock at best, you find yourself in a community where everybody's just doing their best with what they have, which is basically nothing. So you get a lot of peddling and you get a lot of vagabond kind of, this kind of people just trying to sell you on an idea and you buy it because you're trying to, fulfill your idea of what your band should be. And it turns into, I wouldn't say, there's been definitely sleazy situations, but definitely character building is probably the best two words I could come up with in all of that.
That I will accept, character building, because the way I'd like our conversation to go, and, you've got a lot of credits, and, we're going to talk about more about your life, and it's not just music, but, anyone who is creative has a life before music, after music, and, during all this. And I think sometimes what you're doing to support your art is just as interesting as your art. So I definitely want to touch on that. But also, you had a band in Seattle, which was, the ground zero of grunge rock in the early 90s. And you kind of came out of that. And, for me, and I'm a little bit older than you, which I was shocked when I learned that. I thought for sure you were much older than me. This is where you're supposed to chuckle.
Well,
But one thing I want to get into, and I kind of decided this last minute, is to know how the post grunge movement inspired you, and just being in Seattle, in the during the wreckage of grunge rock, which I look back now very sentimental, and I'm shocked to think some of this stuff is 30 years ago. That
yeah.
just that just boggles my mind, because so much of that still feels so fresh. And just to, you, when you first came out with Dead Vampires and doing your own thing, you know, just to know what kind of mark you wanted to put out there. What kind of mark did you want to make as a musician, as an artist on the world?
Well, I moved up to Seattle in 1991, and that's when this whole thing took off. But I was 14 at the time, mind you.
So you are younger than me. I hate you. Go on.
I'm very young. I'm going to live forever. I'm a vampire. um, stupidest joke I've ever said right there. Anyways, 91, I was up here and I missed that whole thing. I was 14. It was happening in my backyard. I was still watching MTV and listening to Megadeth and getting stoned in my bedroom. It was just, that was where I was at. I didn't realize what that whole scene was until way later in life, which was probably 10 to 12 years later, when I was a sound engineer in Seattle working in the clubs. And you kind of, the leftovers from the grunge scene are still there, and I kind of got to relive that through those stories. I was never really a part of that from from the late 80s until like mid 90s, when Hootie and the Blowfish came in and screwed everything up. And
Hootie and the Blowfish.
I blame him for driving a stake into the heart of rock and roll.
Watered down grunge and what kind of evolved in the 90s.
Oh.
My whole take on this is when the girl bands on the Disney Channel started, rocking as hard as Soundgarden, then things got a little weird.
It did. It was like it was kind of like this Kmart cowboy version of rock and roll that kind of filtered into the late 90s. But in the late 90s and early 2000s is when I actually started frequenting the clubs in Seattle. I was in the Navy from 95 to 99, so I missed a chunk of 2 years there. I was out sailing the seven seas. But once I came back, I had a lot of mutual friends from high school. Zach was one of them, and he was the guitar player of Dead Vampires. And we went to a lot of shows together, and he was playing in a lot of local garage rock bands. And that was pretty much my experience with live music in Seattle. That was the genesis for me personally. Once the grunge thing or whatever that was over, you had a cornucopia of garage rock bands that were very powerful. Bands like Zeke, bands like the Heart Attacks, the Catheters, which I believe actually were on the Sub Pop label. But these were bands that I was going to see live, and they were very energetic, and it was nothing like the grunge or what everybody had an idea of what grunge was. But I didn't start playing in a band. And mind you, around 2001, I had become a sound engineer. So I was starting to see what I basically saw was that the whole rock and roll dream of that idea of like being discovered in a bar and being discovered by some, sleazy record producer that was going to take you around the world and you were going to sell albums. I was seeing the dying breath of that and realizing that that wasn't going to exist ever again. There wasn't going to be some, fairy godmother of rock and roll that was going to change your life, because that was what I was programmed to believe as, a 14-year-old in the early 90s. I was thinking, I was watching movies like The Doors, and I was a child during the 80s glam rock, explosion. And that was, my idea of heaven. And that's kind of how, that was the story that I was sold. through my upbringing, as far as, diving and falling in love with rock and roll. It's like you find 5 friends, you spend a few years sucking together, and then you write a song, you play the club, somebody says you're great, and, the rest is, history. I grew up with that very feeble, idea of what
Well, in the late 80s, early
being
90s in
there.
Seattle, you're right. They were just buying up Seattle bands left and right. But
Yeah,
by
that
the
was
time
kind of
you
like
hit
the
the
last
scene,
time that ever happened.
right, but like by the late 90s, early 2000s, like was the Crocodile Cafe still a big place, like Mo Rockin' Cafe? What were the venues you were playing and you were going to?
By the time I got into it, and this was 2004, I was a late bloomer. There was a lot in. I was going around, and, like I said, I was a sound engineer, and there was a lot of just, pubs, basically, just pubs with a sound system that may as well have been a pair of headphones snapped in half and taped to the wall. And there was always a loud, aggressive punk band in them. There was places like, before it was the Fun House, it was called Zach's. Or no, Zach's was down in Zach's Tavern. Yeah. Um, and there was places like Industrial Coffee, and places like the Sit and Spin was a larger club, but there was a lot of these places. There was Gibson's right down there by the Moore Theater, and these were
I
just like,
remember Gibson's, yeah.
yeah, these were these real, just kind of lo-fi places where they would let bands play. And the Funhouse has a lot of sentimental value because a lot of bands got their start there. It was Zach's before, and then Brian Foss took over, and it became the Funhouse. And that is, a lot of people hold that place in high regard, and Brian, for because he, you want to talk about, sleazy clubs and, getting screwed over by, the guy running the door or the guy running the club. Brian Foss was the opposite of all of that. He made sure all those bands were paid. He made sure that everybody was there, had a good time. And that was a different experience than what you were used to down, where they might have a pay to play practice, which among bands, some bands were against that. The promoter of the show gives you so many tickets to sell, and you have to give a percentage of those tickets, the money you've made off those tickets, back, which, that's business as usual. I'm sure all bands have dealt with some form of that on their way up, but there's a lot of bands that refuse to be a part of something like that. They thought that was completely wrong.
Well, let's talk about the Funhouse, which was this, Seattle's premier punk rock nightclub, is across the street from the Seattle Center. For people who don't know, the Seattle Center is that place with the Space Needle, the epicenter of Seattle. And they made a great documentary about the Funhouse because I think they had to close because they were going to like tear it down and build condos or raising the bar because, the gentrification of Seattle. And then thank goodness, they kind of went to another venue with El Corazon. But so you were kind of part of that at the tail end. But what kind of has put you on the map lately is a documentary called Spanky Was a Punk Rocker, which touches upon the drummer of Dead Vampires. And you appear in this.
I do.
Probably a little too briefly. We need a lot more Doc in this documentary. I
know. I mean, it says so. It says so in the genre of the film. It's a documentary.
Exactly.
Definitely needs to be more.
But I think what's so cool about this is now that people can make these kind of low budget, kind of niche documentaries. Not everything has to be an Academy Award, Hollywood documentary, but in these niche documentaries, we're preserving a lot of this band history. And I think we're at this stage where bands kind of have to fight for their history. There's so many bands, there's so many good bands, and there's such a glut. But if you want to be remembered, you kind of have to grab it by the horns and say, look, this is what we did, and this is my experience, and this was important to me. So
You
I want to
mentioned
know from you, how important is it for you to preserve your history as, the creator or part of, not just the creator, but an innovator and the lead singer of this amazingly cool band called Dead Vampires.
well, you mentioned a phrase on a podcast of yours that I listened to, and you said, you put your heart and soul into something, you put all this effort, and then you release it, and it's instantly forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Instantly forgotten. That is so true of the majority of the work I've done since Dead Vampires. It's kind of what it's like. It is so important. The attention span. I don't know how to do it anymore. I mean, back then it was almost pre-social media,
Yeah.
and where I believe that social media definitely helps. I mean, everybody's preserving their legacy on social media with pictures, music, postings, what have you. But there's something about, for me personally, I feel that it's kind of taken the soul out of it, the interest. I think it becomes less valuable on social media. People getting excited about, a band or music. It's like you present something original, and my experience so far is it is instantly forgotten.
Yeah.
It doesn't register, and a lot of that has to
Mhm.
do with age. I was a lot younger in Dead Vampires, and not to mention in Dead Vampires, I had a fire to take over the world in that band. I saw Dead Vampires when it was an instrumental band. And it was before Zach was even in the band. It was his birthday party at the Funhouse. And Dead Vampires was just a keyboard, a drummer, and theremin. And it was one of the most unique things I had seen. And this is after about 3 years of being a sound engineer. And being a sound engineer in a club, especially, you kind of get jaded. You kind of see everything, you just kind of get burned out on everything. At that time, most
Mhm.
bands sounded like Radiohead or Tool. And that was it. Everybody wanted to be Radiohead or they wanted to be Tool, and that was kind of the only two things that I was hearing
That
at
was a
that.
little limited.
It was pretty limited. I mean, I'm sure I'm generalizing here, but at the end of the day, when I think back about that period and mixing in the clubs, all the original bands were kind of in those veins. And then
Well, let's go back then
you
to
see this schlock,
Spanky
yeah,
and
Spanky.
Chainsaw. And so, you got these two guys that wanted, a little more at first. I know Spanky was very influenced by like Guar, the big costume horror rock bands and
As was I.
Kiss, but also with a little bit of electronica. And you were talking about, Chainsaw, the theremin. And they also wanted to, be kind of almost like a bold, out and proud, gay band.
Yeah, and that's what it
And
was. I mean, at the time when I first saw Dead Vampires, I was never under the impression that it was, gay. I didn't know that at all, and it wouldn't have changed my opinion either way. I just thought they were unique and they were awesome to watch, and it was this really unique thing that I was experiencing. And then a month later, Zach gives me a phone call and says, "Hey, what are you doing musically these days?" He was in a horror rock band called Graveyard Shift that I was tapped on the shoulder to sing, but at the time I wasn't in the headspace to do that. And I recorded their first album instead. And they actually went on to have a pretty cool cult following in the psychobilly community. And that's, where me and Zach left off. And then he had since joined Dead Vampires 2 years later. And he asked me if I wanted to sing, and I said, "Give me a day to think about it." And I thought long and hard. And at that time, I had tried to play with other bands. Like I said, you had Radiohead, you had Tool. That was kind of the two choices in all the bands that I was trying at the time. And me, I'm a very theatrical guy. I like shows. I like flair. I like outlandish outrageousness. I think that's a show more. And the more I thought about being in this band, the more and more it sounded like the best idea I was going to make in my life.
Well, the
And
thing about the theatrics, Spanky already was, Count Spankula, the vampire, and Chainsaw was the bunny. And you embraced a look even more so than the others. Maybe they were more masks. You got into prosthetics. You were gluing things onto your face. I mean, you were fully committed to this look.
yeah, I like I said, I joined the band. I went to a rehearsal up in Spanky's castle, Spanky and Chainsaw's castle. I always called it the castle because they lived in a place called Mile High Hill, and they lived in this really nice house up on the hill.
Was this on Lake City?
This was out in Kenmore, Lake City area.
Oh, Kenmore. That's right. Okay.
Kenmore, yeah. Juanita Drive, yeah, that whole area. Anyways, I met him, and Spanky, right from the get-go, he opens the gate to his castle and says, "It's Docula." He was always there. You can almost hear his voice right now say that. And he was right away I felt at home. I met the guys. It was so different. They introduced me to so much new music. I thought I was like a music guy, and I didn't know anything about music. Between Spanky, Matt, and Chainsaw, I learned about so many new bands. They turned me on to a whole new world of music, and it was a new life for me. And
you have a really powerful voice. Had you done a lot of singing before this?
Oh, absolutely. I sang all the time. It was mainly I spent a lot of time singing in karaoke bars on crystal meth. And that was a lot of fun.
Is it better to sing karaoke on crystal meth or to listen to the other singers on crystal meth?
It makes you think that you sound good singing like Stevie Nicks, because
oh God, let me share a story. This is all about you, Doc, but
no,
I once sang Stevie Nicks' "Stop Dragging My Heart Around" at karaoke.
Okay.
And then, like a couple songs later, I'm not going to say a derogatory name to describe her, but this woman came up after me. At karaoke, if someone does a song, you do not later in the night sing a song someone else has sang.
Absolutely.
And she went up and did "Stop Dragging My Heart Around," almost like a direct challenge. Like, how dare she?
Yeah. Oh,
how dare she?
Yeah.
What people who don't do karaoke don't realize, it's war.
It is. You get into some situations in the karaoke world in the short time that I spent in that universe, singing karaoke in certain uncertain territory. There are people that are there every evening, and they're there, and when they show up on stage, the spotlight's on them, and they have a certain song, and they're going to do it, and there's going to be a certain reaction because that is all, that's what they got going on for them. I remember I sang a Lounge Lizard version of "Like a Virgin" by Madonna, but I sang it like William Shatner, "Like a Virgin." Hey, touched for the very first time. Like
little spoken word kind of thing. I did it
spoken word, I made it through the wilderness. But it's got the regular, Like a Virgin Madonna music playing in the background. And to me, that's hilarious. But I did it in this club one night, or this little strip mall bar, and it pissed everybody off. I thought I was going to get...
Oh, my God. When you say strip bar, strip club, like Federal Way or...
Strip mall bar, yeah. Just think of a suburb, those strip malls that got like a nail salon. They got like a 24-hour buffet or something, and then there's always like some little pub in the middle of it that right when you walk through the door you hear that dart machine going.
I know exactly what you're talking about. So in Seattle, what were some of the karaoke bars you used to do?
This was actually up in Everett, and there was a great place. I mean, I had a lot of good memories at these places, but there was places like Kodiak Ron's, which later became a nightclub that they actually had live shows at. But I spent a lot of time speeded out of my mind singing Def Leppard in there. I used to go to a really cool place called Groovies up in Everett. And, I'd sing big, this is back in like 98 when I was in the Navy, and I'd come home, and it was part of that big swing revival,
Mm-hmm.
when, Big Bad Voodoo Daddy and Cherry Poppin' Daddies, and I was out there.
Zoot Suit Riot.
I was zoot suit rioting, dressing like a dick. I was buying like the big baggy pants and the like shirts, and I was like zoot suit riot.
Oh my God, were you doing any stray cats?
Oh God, I used to do Rock This Town and all that stuff. And I mean, those are good memories. My big thing when I was doing that, I did a lot of the Doors, which brings me to the
Mm-hmm.
vocal stylings that I like. I always
So
had
Jim Morrison was like your god.
Jim Morrison was that guy. I'm not the reason I'm not in. I never went to law school was because I discovered the Doors. It's kind of like I went and saw that Oliver Stone film, The Doors, and there went any higher education in my life.
There
I
it
was like,
went.
oh, I'm gonna go do this.
Well, what's your favorite Doors song to do at karaoke back in the
I
day?
always love to do the Crystal Ship.
Oh, really? Interesting choice.
Yeah, the Crystal Ship I would always bring down the house with the Crystal Ship.
Of
But
course
no,
you do.
that song
But
has
don't
that,
you love it when someone does the not obvious choice for a band?
yeah. Oh yeah, when somebody says, "Okay, this is my pick," and then they pick something just way off the wall, like a deep cut, and you're like, "Yeah, it's not." Oh no, I like
So
to.
the hardcore
Come on,
Doors
baby, light my
fans
fire. Huh?
appreciate you. There's the big respect to the Doors fans saying, "Yeah, he's
Yeah,
not doing Light My Fire. This is good."
he's pulling out the deep cut. But that vocal range, I was turned on around the same period when I discovered the Doors. I was turned on to a guy named Danzig. Now, Danzig was the lead singer of the Misfits, but I hadn't
Oh,
discovered them.
thank you for the education.
Yes. Glenn Danzig was the lead singer of the Misfits,
Oh,
and
thank you, Google.
I started Google Doc.
For
I
those
started,
of us
for those of you
who
who
have been
don't
in a
know,
coma for the past 30 years, thank
yes,
you.
let me share my knowledge with you. No, I discovered Danzig before I discovered the Misfits. So I was
Hmm.
listening to that and, singing along with those albums. And that's where, I started noticing, when you're 14 or 15, you notice, hey, I can kind of sound like that. You kind of cling on to that and you're just like, yeah. And then you become the Danzig guy. And I did that
Did you ever do Danzig at karaoke?
I did Danzig when in the early days of the karaoke bar, Danzig
Hmm.
was limited. Nowadays they just have a computer and they could pull up anything.
Anything, yeah.
It's weird, but back then you'd get Mother, and that was about it. You always knew there was like the karaoke guy there because he would bring his own CDs in.
Nice.
He'd go up to the guy. He'd go up to the DJ who was running the karaoke machine, slip him a $5, and go, "Okay, here's my CD, and you got to start it at this part right here."
Oh my God. Well, can I share two stories with you, even though this is all about
Please.
you, Doc?
No, I
Because
want.
because now that I had no idea we were going to talk karaoke, which just stimulates me to no end.
That's the beauty about doing an interview with me. It generally goes off the rails within 5 minutes, and we don't even know what we were doing an interview about.
And I heard you on records with Ray.
Yeah,
Is it Ray or Roy?
records with Ray.
Ray, I got it right.
Yeah,
No. Very quickly though, because you mentioned the Doors. I have to say this before I forget, because I'm older than you and I have very few brain cells left.
I've got 3 work
Is
time.
in the mid 2000s, right when American Idol was still new and kind of hot, and this karaoke bar was doing kind of like their version of American Idol with karaoke. Very cruel. And they try to, they have these, judges, and they're being very Simon Cowell. And week after week, is like, if you won, you got through to the next thing. I didn't compete in it, I could not, bear the scrutiny of these vicious judges. But I had a friend who competed, and then he was getting through week after week. And then one week, he wanted to do the Doors, and I said, "Do Backdoor Man."
Oh God, one of my
I'm
favorites.
a backdoor man. And he did it, God bless him. And the judges were just cruel. And I thought he was amazing, but they
Yeah.
just didn't really get the Doors. And I think that's why they were so vicious to him.
He wasn't part of their tribe.
No, he wasn't. But you know what? I had
Sometimes
undying respect at the fact he did that song.
I love that. I like it when the underdog shows up in front of the lions and roars. I've seen that one too many times when the people just don't get it, but the
They
guy
don't
they
get
give
it.
their all. And that to
And
me, I like that performance better because the deal is no matter what the judges thought about him, I guarantee those judges will never forget him.
no. And they will never do anything as important in their life as performing Backdoor Man at a karaoke competition.
Exactly.
Well, when you said bringing your own disc,
Yeah.
oh my God, you're just, these flashbacks are flooding me. You know, Tacoma, Washington?
It was a whole period of my life.
Do you remember Pacific
karaoke.
Avenue?
Huh?
Do you remember Pacific Avenue?
I do.
In
Tacoma?
Tacoma. So there was like this really dive bar on Pacific Avenue, but they had really good karaoke. Go figure. And this was maybe like late 2000s, 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of hanging out hearing karaoke, doing it. And there's this woman who would go up and she'd always bring her own disc. And
Mm-hmm.
she looked kind of just this waif figure, just this tiny woman. And you think, oh, okay. And then she'd go up and just sing, and this huge voice would come out, and I go, oh my God, she's amazing, like singing Mariah Carey and all this stuff.
Right.
But I didn't realize until, much later when she brought the disc, she just brought like the Mariah Carey CD and said, crank it. And she was just like mouthing it, just whispering the lyrics. We were hearing the real Mariah. And I thought, oh my God.
Now that you told me that she was actually just lip syncing to Mariah, that makes this story way better.
Here's what's really cool about the story when she go up. Her name was Cleopatra.
Oh my God. Was this like circa 99?
Well, you would think it was like 2008, maybe latest 2009. But that's the fun part about karaoke. You could be anonymous. And if you wanted to have like a stage name, you could do that.
You could do, yeah. The world of karaoke, it definitely, that would be an episode in itself. But those days, my first days of singing The Doors and all of that at the karaoke is what led me to finally being in a band and led me to that rehearsal with Spanky, Chainsaw, Matt, and Zach. And I believe the first rehearsal, they just played the songs and I just growled a lot. I didn't because I didn't have any lyrics. I was just listening to what they were playing, and I was just a monster up in their attic, growling and yelling and just doing that. And I was hired. They said, you're in.
See, remember back in the day, there was like these little weekly newspapers where you go into the classifieds, and it would say like, band seeks lead singer. You just do these blind ads. There'd be a phone number you'd call, and I don't know, what would they do? Say, okay, we'll try you out. I mean, it was kind of like a risky thing to just show up and say, hey, I'm going to try out for a band.
Back then, I think that was just the way I always looked at that. I never did that. I think I did it once in high school. And I always went, I was in high school and I always wound up in these bands with like older dudes. and it was just awkward, and I didn't belong there.
I
But
mean, like the old Leonard Skinner kind of crowd.
maybe a little bit, that would have been cool, actually. No, I
That
just
would have been
guys.
cool.
I just wound up like, the couple of times I did it, it was just with guy. It's like dating. That's what I can compare those to. Those ads in the paper. You're dating. You're going on a blind date, and you have a couple of references of what you guys like. They say, "Oh, we need a singer, not a douche, doesn't do drugs, and no Stairway to Heaven, please." Just stuff like that.
By
So
the way, we're gonna continue this, but what are you like on an actual blind date with a woman?
a blind date, I think I've only been on one, and it's usually like, lights, camera, action. I just start putting on the show, and it usually, I think the only one time I was on a blind date, it basically ended with her very angry, and I was just like, okay, well, this has been great and all, but Tanya or Tina, whatever your name was, I really didn't give a shit. Have a good life, and don't try and cry too hard on your pillow tonight. Can't imagine why the date didn't work out.
So there's something about being in a band that just has this aura about it, and everyone thinks that you start a band, you jam, in 2 weeks you get good, you play gigs. But what's the reality? I mean, how long did it take for you to merge with Spanky, Chainsaw, Zach, to really feel up and running before you guys could play a gig together?
The reality is, with that band, it started out as an instrumental band, and we were always putting the cart before the horses. Spanky was, when Spanky gets excited about something, I mean, he love you long time. And he would just book shows, and I knew after the first rehearsal, I was like, I need a CD of all your instrumental music. I'm going on vacation with my wife, and I will be back. And
Were you married at the time?
I was married at the time, yeah. And I went on a trip to Disneyland, and I, on the road trip, did a lot of drugs, and I started writing lyrics to all their instrumental songs. And I came
Did you
back.
have your son at the time?
What's that?
Did you have your son at the time?
No, my son wasn't born yet.
Okay.
So this was just me and my wife. We went on a 1-week road trip down to California, and I spent the time in the car writing lyrics to the first song that had lyrics with the Dead Vampires.
What was the first Dead Vampires song you wrote lyrics to?
Bloody Bitch, which was later
what? What was it called?
It was called Bloody Bitch, later titled Bloody. And that is on the album We Are the Dead Vampires, which you can purchase at dalefall.bandcamp.com. But Bloody, yes, that was the first lyrics that I composed from an instrumental song called Bloody Bitch.
And when you brought these lyrics to the band, how did they respond?
The first year in that band was one of the best times of my life. Because you're always nervous about what I've learned about being in bands, especially now as, a songwriter. When you bring material to a group of guys that you want to play your music, and that's the key term there, you're bringing material to people that you want to play for you. You're not paying them to play. You want them to play. So, there's the moments when you bring material and you see that bored look in their eye, you see disappointment, they just don't get it. I've been through all of it. In that band, the first year, everything that everybody brought to the table creatively was gold. We were always excited. And I think that's why we started booking shows together as a band. I remember they did one show. They had one show on the books, and I said, I won't be ready for that one, but I'll be ready for the next. And I kept my word. We practiced I believe we were practicing on Monday nights, and we rehearsed, we were like soldiers. We just went through the material. Spanky recorded everything. So we always had material to, we always had a way to go back and see what we were doing. And it's like anything in the world when you start something out, it's rusty, it's not going to make sense, but I knew it was something very, very special. And the first show we did in a basement of this club. It was basically a basement of a building called the Mercury. And it was on a Sunday night, which is basically the worst night of the week to do anything. And we did a Sunday night show in front of about 10 people. And history was made. I gave that show my all. Special friends. My wife was in the crowd. From the look on the majority of the people's face there, because these were all personal friends and personal family, they didn't get it. And that's what I realized what I was getting into. My life was changing. Everybody who knew me was like, okay, this guy's part of something totally different now. Best of luck to him. And you rarely saw those people at shows in the future, because there is a major difference in the world of rock and roll when you perform between your friends and family and your fans.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got to know what that was being in Dead Vampires, because Dead Vampires actually had fans. And it was a pretty incredible thing to experience.
Now, the Mercury, that was kind of like an industrial club.
Yeah, great story about the Mercury. We did our first Halloween show there, and the owner at the time, he was very kind to us. He was very, had a lot of hospitality. But he was very, very into the image of the Mercury. The Mercury was kind of like an elite industrial club. And Spanky, bless his heart, they basically gave us full reign to decorate the club. And
Nice.
Spanky comes to this industrial club with, like the happy Halloween decorations that you would put on your door in the suburbs. The kind of stuff you get at Target at the bargain bin. He was just decorating with all, and it's Spanky. He's excited about it and you're happy for him. But the owner walked through and said, absolutely not.
Didn't he have any sense of irony?
What's that?
Maybe couldn't this have been an ironic artistic statement?
I don't know. It was just Spanky. Spanky had his vision, and it was not what the owner wanted. Chainsaw, on the other hand, had a little bit of a better handle on the aesthetic, and he gathered all these old sticks, all this old wood from their property, and he turned that place into this huge forest, like a dead forest, and it looked really cool. That was wow. More along the owner was really happy with that, and not so happy with the whole living in the suburbs.
Well, it's so interesting you mentioned that as kind of your springboard for, people outside of Seattle. Just describe a little more, like, what is the scene in a club like that? And especially when you're attracting your initial audience, because I know, well, you and Spanky have talked about going to like these kind of redneck clubs in the suburbs where it's much more this machismo rock, where they're just really, when any kind of subtlety is lost on them. What's the importance of going to like an industrial club that's really open to gay, straight, and just art rock and just kind of, different alternative scene? Was that really important at the beginning?
It is. I mean, I think it's important, but in a lot of ways, I'm glad I was in the frame of mind I was at the time, because all of that was lost on me. You got to keep in mind, this was my first band, and I had a couple of ties in the community through my sound work. So I had ties to all these clubs. So I was just thinking, we need to play every club. We can't just, limit it to this and that, which in a lot of ways.
When you did this club, though, were you already in full vampire makeup?
Yeah, the first time I believe I did my makeup at the house, and from there on, it became. I don't. Here's the thing, believe it or not, unless I'm on stage, I don't like to be seen in public in my makeup or my costume. Right. I'm not an exhibitionist unless I'm on stage. When I'm on stage, I totally turn into a different person. It's weird. It's Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. But when I'm out in public, I hate it. I cannot stand being out there being like look at me, look at me. I don't want to be seen. So it's a phobia, actually. You know,
Interesting. Because a lot of artists compensate. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'm shy, but I become a big actor and I'm out there, in front of the public." Not uncommon. But what I'm curious is, before Dead Vampires, were you into horror rock like Guar or Kiss, making
yeah, I
themselves
was.
up as these
I was
characters? Did you like that before?
oh, I loved it. Guar was one of my favorite, rock bands. At the time, I was heavily. I mean, I've been into. My mother introduced me to Alice Cooper, so that's been a huge influence throughout my life in every
Hmm.
way. Yeah, the shocking rock, and then I was really into Marilyn Manson. When Hootie and, like I say, when Hootie and the Blowfish screwed everything up in the mainstream rock and roll vein. I really I dove underground, and I discovered a lot of cool. That's when I discovered like all the really cool rockabilly bands like the Cramps, the Reverend Horton Heat. I really attached to that and kind of left headbanger music in the dust.
Well, one thing that
And
Chainsaw from the band said about you in the documentary is you brought the rockabilly influence to the band.
right,
Maybe
yeah,
Chainsaw and Spanky were a little more Pet Shop Boys and Erasure and
I think
Noise.
that's what I think at the time that's what made. I mean, later on in life, you realize these are the things that maybe kind of hurt the band was that. But what I think made Dead Vampires such a special band and why it still to this day has, it has a pretty solid following. I still get mail, and I still get messages, people wanting those old records, and it hasn't been an active band in 10 years, and I'm still getting feedback from them.
Isn't a big part
So
of
it's
a
just kind of like,
band
oh,
or
this
any
is awesome.
artistic group chemistry? And even though there's some
That
differences, didn't you all fulfill the gaps in each other? Like you all brought something special that in the mix made it greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. That's what I've always believed about Dead Vampires in its original formation. It was five different entities with different, you had five people with different passionate like music tastes. It wasn't like everybody likes the Misfits. No, it was, I mean, if you get four guys in a room and they all say, hey, I like the Misfits. You like the Misfits. I like the Misfits. What is it going to sound like? It's probably going to sound like the Misfits. No, you had a guy who was in monster bands and all this weird, just eclectic music. You had a guy who was into, just a god. I I believe Spanky used to call Chainsaw's music Nazis and nature nut music or something. Nazis and acorn music, but it wasn't Nazis or it didn't have anything to do with that. It was just he was really into like he's into all kinds of noise,
Hmm.
sound and skates and different,
Pushing the boundaries.
he was really into a lot of avant-garde stuff, just
Avant-garde.
out of this world, really out of this world music that I never heard. And he turned me on to so much cool stuff. And then you had Matt, who was just really into electronic music, like Moog, and he had a really good handle on that. And Matt was a very, very talented keyboard player. I used to at the time think, man, why don't you upgrade your rig a little bit? But no, what he was doing on his gear, on his keyboard, was really special, and he had a vision and Spanky had a vision. Zach was a garage rock guitarist, and then you had me as the front man, and I think those different entities really made that band what it was. It was a really special thing, and that's why it was really unique.
Mm.
If I was
When
just
you
in a
when you
band with
when you play these clubs, you as the lead singer, you're like the first line of defense.
right,
And it's interesting talking to Chainsaw and Spanky. When it's good, it's good. When the crowd's good, it's great. When they're hostile, you as lead singer take a lot of that hostility. I mean,
I learned
what does it feel like to be the buffer for the band?
Well, what I developed in that band was I've always been, as you can probably tell in this interview, I've always been a frustrated comic, stand-up comic. Like in every faucet of my life, it's like showtime. I'm always trying to, push my new material, and what I think's funny into just a regular conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And what you learn as the front man, because trust me, we played in front of some pretty hostile crowds. I'm up there, wrestling around with a big stuffed snake that you would win at the carnival, and I'm in a room full of angry as fuck crust punks that don't have a sense of humor, don't have futures, and
they just want to slam dance.
And you get this, yeah, and you start realizing, what situation you're in. But through all those shows, I developed a stand-up routine. I developed a way of kind of shitting on the audience if they gave me any lip.
So you talked to the audience
came out
between songs.
Swinging.
You had some spiel going.
Oh God, I would include. There was times. I mean, Spanky just recently went through all of his videos, and he was showing me. And I haven't seen these perform. Some of them I haven't ever seen. I just know that they happened. And yeah, I was like a kind of a cheaper version of Andrew Dice Clay. If somebody
you kind of look like
with me
too,
on stage,
especially when you have the sideburns.
Like I said, I would. When I get on stage, it's like you're a different person. There's a different guy that's up there, and
when you put a mask on,
showing me
when you put a mask on,
yeah,
does that give you license to be a little ballsier?
Yeah, I think that's what it was, and I realized that later on when I was in like bands where I didn't wear makeup or a mask. I had a hard time looking at the audience. With a mask, I can kind of do anything. But when you're actually face to face with everybody, yeah, I get stage fright. I do to this day. I just did a bunch of shows last year, and I still get stage fright.
Oh my God.
It's really weird. But once the music starts, it's on. Mm-hmm. And like I said, Spanky, he was showing me these videos, and yeah, it was like this kind of weird PG-13 Andrew Dice, and that's back to the audience, because you get audiences, and like I said, we played a lot of different audiences. We were playing, in the gay community, which was always fun, which was always great. And then I started, doing, because my whole idea was like, we need to play everywhere we can. I wasn't thinking the repercussions of that. I wasn't thinking of the repercussions of what it would be like to be playing up in Everett in front of a bunch of butt rockers. I'm just thinking the more people, the better, right? When really it puts you in some awkward situations that that the rest of the guys, I don't think, probably turned them off. As a matter of fact, I know it did, because that's what eventually led to, the band breaking up after a couple of years, because it was, it became more about, like, I believe Chainsaw said, it did become more about the shows. I was all about, like, we got to get play more in shows, which really kind of hurts the band, because a band should only play once in a while if you're local and you're not out on the road, because people lose interest. But my whole idea was, well, we play different venues, we play different towns in front of different audiences. I mean, we're bound to turn somebody onto our music doing that. But it was it was a big learning experience.
All right. Well, I want to talk about what you did after Dead Vampires, especially your solo CD. Before we get into that, and I really do like your solo CD, as you know, but
I love that solo.
Yeah, it was called "Look What the Devil Made Me Do." Before we get into that, I just want to talk about that whole period, between Dead Vampires, you doing your solo CD. Again, we're still in like this post-grunge environment, but it seems like after Dead Vampires, without those constraints, you could embrace your full rockabilly self. So I'd like you to describe, what are your rockabilly influences? Because some of your work is this very 50s, and I really like it. And it's almost, to me, your solo work would be like something, David Lynch would love to use as a soundtrack. You know that David Lynch retro
Oh
rockabilly
God,
kind
yeah.
of sound. You know what I mean?
It's it's the sound you hear when you see. Yes, the sound you hear. It's my idea of what the sound that's made when angels are making love is the music you hear in a David Lynch movie, or
Exactly.
more or less angels flying down from heaven and gang banging my face, more or less.
And then what is it that attracts you to that sound? Because you're so young. When you
It's
were born, Elvis, I think you were born the year Elvis died.
I was born for 6 months before he died. Yes.
Yeah, because you were born in
Um,
77.
something. Yes, 77, and he died in August, and I was born in
Yep.
February.
Yep.
So the solo sound. So yeah, I did. So I was in Dead Vampires for 6 years, and it was to date one of the best experiences I've had in my life. After Spanky and Chainsaw, we went through lineup changes, and we recorded another album called The Day After Halloween, and it was more rock, and that was a really fun time as well. It's like I look at this Dead Vampires as like these two different chapters. There was a first chapter that was very bittersweet and very, dear to me, and then that second chapter was a goddamn roller coaster ride, because it felt like we were on the verge of, going to that place that a band wants to go, that you try so hard to get to, and we were getting there. We were there, and then Matt passed away, and the rest is history. It's just like we didn't want to go on without him. We didn't want
So
to
when
keep
that
going.
happened and you kind of took a break, how did you
Yeah.
regroup yourself and get to the point when you decided, I want to make a rockabilly album, you know?
Well, heroin doesn't pay for itself.
No. Did
And
you do heroin?
no,
Doc,
I'm
did
just
you
kidding.
do
No, I fell
heroin?
into no, I was a painkiller guy. I was really into
OxyContin?
painkillers.
Like
I went through that.
OxyContin?
Yeah, I was really into that for about 3 years. I
Oh my
I, I,
God.
I crawled into a
Did
bottle,
you have
and
like an accident or a back problem or what happened?
I don't know. I started after Dead Vampires ended, and I was also in another local band, which was kind of like a super group with a bunch of friends, and it was a lot of fun. But it didn't hold the weight that Dead
Kind of
Vampires
like
did. But
kind of like an audio slave or
it was called, yeah. It was just a bunch of from other bands, and we put together this band. Well, the drummer did. It was called Los Bastardos, and it was just more like a Motorhead kind of. It was a little bit more hardcore. But I did that for a couple of years, and through that period, I've always considered my music career to be like a behind the music without the getting rich and famous part, because all the other shit happened. Like, you're in a band, it's great, you have good times, and then shit hits the fan, and before you know it, you're popping pills in your head like a pelican.
oh my God. See, back then it was easier to get a prescription for OxyContin.
Oh God, I found the Elvis doctor. It started with just something stupid like, oh God, my sciatic nerve is hurting me. And then there happens to be, a certain person there that goes, oh, well, take one of these. And I was completely naive to pills and all that. I didn't know. Like I said, I was a meth head. That was it. And I stopped doing that once I started Dead Vampires, and I was all good to go. But no, I fell down that rabbit hole that a lot of people do with painkillers. It's a nasty world if you have the mind of an addict. If you have an addictive personality, and I fell for it hook, line, and sinker, and that was kind of my life for a few years. And I wrote "Look What the Devil Made Me Do" and recorded demos for that in the tail end of my addiction. And and those were all personal songs. They were all songs that came from a way different place. You got to understand, I spent about 7 years writing songs about vampires and fucking dead chicks, and now I was kind of going to a place where you don't brag about it at parties. It was a really personal spot, really. And what I've learned about when you write something personal and you wear your heart on your sleeve, that's what this was. This was like me putting my heart on my sleeve and pouring everything out into 5 songs. And
Right, and it
I
sounds
had
like
these
you took
unrealistic
but
expectations
you
of what
put
that would turn into.
you took a personal inventory, said, "Here I am. This is who I am now." How did
Yeah.
you put together a band to actually record this?
Well, over the time, of Dead Vampires, I had developed really good relationships with pro musicians, and the bass player and the drummer of the last lineup of Dead Vampires, Steve Jones and Rich Evans, they were a great rhythm section. Steve Jones, he was in Ancient Warlocks, he was in the Earaches, he's in tons of bands, and he runs his own recording studio. He's now relocated to Olympia. Dear guy, great drummer, great guy to have in your band. And, he was a solid guy to have be a part of that, as well as Rich, who is one of the best musicians that I've ever played with in my life. This is one of those multi-talented, can play every instrument, and plays it well. Kind of a pain in the ass sometimes because he'll tell you when you're doing it wrong. And I need that guy to tell me when I'm doing it wrong, when I'm playing the wrong note. Whereas, I was used to the world of punk rock where it's just like play it loud and who gives a shit. What's that?
Right, right. And indulge me here and let me say the track list of Look What the Devil Made Me Do. 5 songs, and I love this album, by the way. So, Poison Candy, Look What the Devil Made Me Do, Desert Bride, 21st Century Fox, and Superhero. Does each of those songs have a special meaning to you?
Well, yeah, like Poison Candy, that was just a story. That was just me trying to still be creative in that Dead Vampire. I wrote the music to that like 10 years prior. It was always this rockabilly riff I had that never really made it into the Dead Vampires canon. But that was me on guitar, and I wrote a fun little song about a girl that, basically turns on her lover, but the lover comes back and haunts her for the rest of her life. So that was me being creative with the song, just trying to write a story, what I was used to in Dead Vampires, not real life, just kind of opening the album up with a like, here you go, here's my new album, this is my solo project, this isn't Dead Vampires, this is me, and this is my heart.
Right.
Look What the Devil Made Me Do, which became the title of the album. That was another riff.
Amazing track. I mean, it's moody. That is so David Lynch.
It is. And David Lynch and all that music, I've always been inspired by female singers. Patsy Cline is, okay. A lot of people, when they hear my stuff, it's just instantly Danzig. That's all I've ever gotten. I never really, over the years, I've tried to develop my own voice, whereas in the beginning, you just kind of do what you know, and of course, people automatically hear your influence, and mine obviously was, Jim Morrison and Danzig. But I've always tried to develop my own style of singing, and female singers have always had more of a special place in my heart and inspired me more than male singers. Patsy Cline, Joanna from Concrete Blonde, Janis Joplin.
By the way, I saw
Julie Cruz.
I saw Concrete Blonde live in 1985.
I never saw them live.
Anyway,
did
I interrupt. I'm sorry because I love
no,
Julie
that's fine. I
Cruz.
like it.
Please
No, I
continue.
love Concrete Blonde. They've played
No,
so many
I
times.
saw them because they opened for Cyndi Lauper in '85 at the Paramount Theater in Seattle.
That would have been amazing. See, those are the stories I like to hear. I like hearing about that. I like hearing like when somebody says they saw. I had an instructor, one of my instructors from the Art Institute, his band for Adam Ant in like 1982 at the
Oh
Paramount
my
Theater, and
God,
I would just
that would
and
have
I
been
would just
amazing.
pick, yeah, and I would just pick his brain about that experience and what it's like, because that's the stuff that I'm turned on, is like those shows that I just I was not I was 5, I was I wasn't going to
You were a
concerts
child.
then.
But
So
when you say Julie Cruz in the early '90s, oh my God, her work with David Lynch, not just on Twin Peaks. Remember the Industrial Symphony
yeah,
that
I remember
she sang
everything,
on?
all the stuff that she did. I discovered it all later on, because early 90s, again, when I was 14, I loved the movie Blue Velvet. I loved
Mhm.
Eraserhead, and I think Wild at Heart was at the time, but
Yeah.
I never, that was all I knew of David Lynch. And then the whole Twin Peaks thing started, and I was a late bloomer. I
Oh my God.
remember everybody was asked that,
Do you
but I
know
kind of
do you
didn't.
know Fire Walk with Me?
I saw it in the theater. Yeah.
Oh my God, and Julie Cruz on that. That is like one of
Oh,
my all-time
it,
greatest influences. Fire
and
Walk with
when she
Me
sings,
soundtrack.
when she that soundtrack, um, I actually, one of the guitar riffs, um, inspired one of my Dead Vampire songs, "Dead and Blue." If you
Wow.
listen to when Laura Palmer and Donna are sitting there talking, and
Mhm.
you hear that guitar melody playing in the background when they're talking in their living room about James. I forgot what the name of it was on the track. I forgot the name of the track, but yeah, that inspired a Dead Vampire song, that guitar
Why do
riff.
we like that era, that kind of '50s nostalgia, but remade through another decade, rockabilly? What is it? What's at the core of that that's so appealing?
I I think it's very dreamy. There's something dreamy and innocent. I've always been fascinated by teenage. There's always there's something about 50s music, and it's the genesis of rock and roll. But I'm not just talking about rock and roll like Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all that. I'm talking about like the girl groups like the Shirelles and
The
those dream
Chiffon,
pop bands, the Chiffons, and
leader of the
those
pack.
dream pop bands of the early.
Yeah.
But there was also these like ballads, these like car crash ballads, like little Susie went to heaven, I'll meet her someday, kind of. And if you really dig deep, there's actually like some creepy songs from that period in that
Oh,
vein,
yeah.
like "Strange Things Happen in This World"
But
by
isn't the whole thing
Slim
about '50s rock, it's all
something or other.
about the good girl hooking up with the bad boy and the bad things
Right.
that happen.
And there's this innocence to it all, but maybe it's just some subconscious thing, like we all want to hook up. We're all more turned on by that bad boy than we are the
It's
little
always
preppy
about
guy.
the sheltered good girl hooking up with the bad boy.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that's generally how things pan out? Because why do you want to hook up with the prep and the guy who's got a letter on his shirt? It's just like, that's so typical. What happens when you hook up with the bad boy? Your life is ruined. That's what happens. But I think it's a way more exciting ride than hooking up with the typical milk toast prep guy with the flat top and wings haircut, and he's just cruising to a good future. And of course, yeah, you want a good future, but you also want excitement in your life. And then there's the bad boy, and it's always way more exciting. It's just it's not going to be very healthy for you.
Don't you think that's
And
why in the 80s things got a little too squeaky clean by the end of the decade? I mean, look what happened to Chicago, my God. And maybe that's
oh,
why people loved grunge because they were so desperate for a new kind of bad boy.
well, yeah. I mean, and the thing about grunge and what I think about grunge, I think people were just I think too much of anything will burn you out, and I think the '80s was all about decadence. It was all about just excess. The bands were outrageous. The music was outrageous. It was all just neon light in your face from 81 to 89. And then then you get like a third wave of bands still trying to cash in on this, but you're burned out, and then something new comes along. There's always something waiting in the works that you're not expecting. And mainstream wise, for a while, all those grunge bands were playing probably glam rock. If you see pictures of Alice in Chains in their earlier days, they are totally glam rock.
Oh
They
my
got the
God.
hair.
Now
If you see pictures
you've tipped me off. Okay. Do you ever like go down the rabbit hole on YouTube
occasionally,
and you just get into some old band? I mean, I do that with Alice in Chains sometimes. I do.
yeah,
Jar of Flies. That
what a
was an
great album.
amazing album. And a little aside, this is all about you, Doc, but to bring it back to me for one brief moment. Back when Alice in Chains was actually really big on the charts and doing their thing, I was living in the U District. I had their CD, Jar of Flies, and I looked on the back, and they had an address for their fan club where you could write to them.
Uh-huh.
This little P.O. box kind of thing, this little private mail service. I looked at it, I said, that's 2 blocks from where I live. So I walked down the street and there's this little private mailbox, service. Oh my God, that's where Alice in Chains gets their mail. And I think people in other parts of the country don't realize when you lived in Seattle in the late 80s and early 90s, this whole grunge rock thing, you would run into these people. Although
Yeah.
I didn't do drugs, so I didn't like run into them, they're drug dealers. But I mean, they were like accessible. You know what I mean?
And they still are. That's what I learned in my sound days doing clubs. And this is long after that whole grunge thing happened. Because the thing about grunge is those were guys that didn't want to be famous. They weren't trying to be rock stars. They were playing music in their basements because it's raining outside and there ain't anything else to do. That's what they do. They're just playing rock and roll. And somebody comes around and goes, I discovered the new sound. And before you know it, ta-da, it's grunge. But
Yeah.
that they
So
are
I want to
easily
get your opinion on grunge, okay? First of all, this is Chris Cornell, rest in peace, amazing musician, truly. Did you prefer Soundgarden Chris Cornell or Audio Slave Chris Cornell?
I liked Soundgarden.
Black Hole Sun?
I was a Black Hole Sun guy. Yeah.
But how about Like a Stone Audio Slave?
It was a good song. I liked what Audio Slave was doing. It just didn't really, how can I say? I was in a different frame of mind by that point. That was radio rock, the white noise of the world. I call it prom rock.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's just, it wasn't where I was at. Soundgarden had a better chance when it came to the grunge music. I was really into Alice in Chains. They're like my favorite band from Seattle.
Good for you.
Hands down.
High five. Because I think for Seattle bands, I mean, I love Nirvana.
Yeah, I love
But
Nirvana.
Alice in Chains, when you like voluntarily listen to music from that era, who do you like now want to listen to?
Alice in Chains.
Yeah.
That's what I listen to. That's like I still listen to that. I got burned out because over the last 10 years, and I'm just as guilty of it, there has been a blizzard of tribute bands in Seattle because playing in a tribute band is really fun. My bass player, Rich, he just mentioned how, you're playing somebody else's music, but when we've played in tribute bands, we have had more fun than a lot of nights playing our original music, because when you're playing your original music and you're on the wrong side of 30, getting people to come out is a chore. You gotta understand, maybe in your 20s, it was a lot easier to get people to come out to a show because you're all young, you have energy, you want to go out, you want to do things. There's people there to meet. Everybody's gonna have a good time. But in your 30s, your audience starts getting mortgage payments. They start having kids. They become drug addicts, or worse, they become sober, like me. And and it's just this. The older you get, it's harder and harder to get that audience in there. But with tribute bands, you have an audience. People go see tribute bands, and I've done like 3 of them, and they're always a blast.
Do you get gigs at casinos? Because I think they play the tribute bands, the casinos.
I played a casino in the Danzig tribute band I did. If you can imagine that.
Did you play all your fee away? Did you lose all your money that you earned playing the gig?
No, what I learned is that I'm a terrible manager and I shouldn't be in charge of the money, because the thing about casinos, they pay lots of money.
Yeah, they're a really good gig.
Oh no, get this. This is the story. I was doing sound at a Peter Frampton concert, and this was at the Tulalip Casino. And the guy who runs the show inside at the Cabaret Canoe, he asked me, and this is a true story. He's like, "Hey, are you the Danzig guy?" And I'm like, "Is that what I've morphed into?" I guess yes, I am. I'm the Danzig guy. And he's like, "How much I want to do a Halloween show. How much do you guys charge?" And this is my business sense. I looked at him dead in the eyes and I said, $500. And he's like, "Oh, excellent. We can do this." And he walked away. And it's that moment when you realize I could have gotten way more, couldn't I?
$500? Oh my God.
I did a casino gig for $500, and I asked a mutual friend who was in a mutual band fronted by Jim Morrison, but it was a tribute band. And I asked him how much he got, and then I realized I completely not only fucked myself, but I fucked the band.
Did that even cover like gasoline for your round trip?
You know what it is? It's just that's what I'm used to. That's if you get 100, if you walk away, this is the sad reality. You wanted to know some sleazy stories, and it's not even really sleazy. It's just the reality of being in a band circa 2004 to now. If I walked out of the club with $100 after a show, that was an excellent night. And I mean, that's every band member being paid, and you're still got $100. You got to understand, it's a door. You get like a door. They charge at the door, and they split it up between 3 bands. And most bands, everybody, for the most part, everybody gets along. Usually you're in that situation where you've dragged 2 buddies of yours that are in other bands, and it's a show that didn't turn out very well. And you're giving them $20 for all of them. And it's not a good feeling. But
the bartender is making more than you that night.
Oh, yeah. The bands are, they say never date a stripper and never date a musician. Well, strippers at least have money. Musicians, you don't make money doing it. I don't know how you do it. I know some people, they figure it out, but that's where you got to have a manager. You got to be in the business. You got to have somebody who knows what they're doing. When you're just a local group and you're just clinging to the idea of playing a gig or getting on a bill, that was a lot of what caused a lot of trauma too, is like we would get invited to do a show, and I knew that it would be a big show. A lot of these shows were rockabilly bands, and Dead Vampires wasn't really a rockabilly band like, Chainsaw and all the mention. I brought that influence into it, but it was a combination of things. But we would play a lot of rockabilly shows. Rockabilly shows bring a lot of, they could bring a pretty hardcore element, but the money that you make at it, it's not much. You usually on these bills with like 8 bands, and it's like, you're gonna split $500 between 8 bands. Each band has 4 people. So it just gets into this weird world where it's not about money. It's about trying to get exposure, or at least at the time, that's what I was thinking. I was like, fuck the money. Think of all the people that we are playing in front of. And then we'll sell our CDs and we get more of a name out there and people start knowing about us. That's what I was looking at. So then you get into that mentality 8 years down the road when a guy who was going to give you $5,000, you just go, no, I'll take 500. And he's like, oh, see you on Halloween.
Well, we're going to get into the final stretch here, and I want to talk about horror movies.
Oh, please, let's. Is there anything that I've stirred up? Before we get into horror movies, I want to make sure, because I have the attention span of a goldfish. And is there anything that I haven't covered that you really wanted to get as far as the music with the solo album or the horror elements?
Because after Look What the Devil Made Me Do, I think you put out a single called Years and Years, the Zombie Love Song.
Yes, that was a sweet little, the origin of that song was, I wrote it for a friend. A fan contacted me and he wanted a song written for his wedding. And that's what I came up with. I came up with that song, and it's one of the best songs I've ever written in my life. And that was just, somebody just said, I want a song. We're getting married on Halloween. We're a big fan of yours. Would you write us a song? And I brought that song to Rich, and we recorded it, and it's one of the best songs I've ever recorded.
It's great. It has a very retro 50s feel to it.
Yeah, it's very Soldier Boy.
Mm-hmm.
But
was it kind of nice to be like asked to write something? Because it seems like sometimes when you are given parameters, those are good. You do your best work when you have some limits.
You do, yeah. You don't want to like do something completely dastardly that they're going to be embarrassed to play. But no, I put my heart. I always know if I put my heart and soul into it, I don't care what the outcome is. It's like, oh, that was really cool. And that particular song, I put my heart and soul into. And that's what the beauty is about Dead Vampires. There's been a good handful of people that have written me or contacted me, and they played that song they've played a Dead Vampire song at their wedding. They had their first dance to it. They play it all the time on Halloween. I get these messages, and it's like, that is why, maybe 20 years ago, okay, I wanted to do rock and roll because I wanted to be Jim Morrison and all this shit that I grew up, idolizing. But now, after all is said and done, and I'm not even doing music at this precise moment in my life, that is more of a reward than having a career. It's just knowing that, okay, there's somebody out there that I don't know, and they were so moved by a song that I wrote that they played it at their wedding or had their first dance to it. And I mean, that to me, and that happens all the time. It's like I get that message once in a while, and it's like, wow,
that's amazing. What is your most beautiful memory of Dead Vampires?
Beautiful memory.
Yeah, dig deep. Beautiful memory.
The last show, and I think I realized that the last show that we played, the final show at the Funhouse, because it's a punk rock Halloween show, and we played Closed Casket, and you look out and you see tears in people's eyes because they know it's the end. And that just proved that I was like, okay, we did something special. We did something cool. We've been in this room for the last 6 years, having the time of our lives. And here we are. We're calling it quits, and these people don't want it to end. They're just kind of like, man, this is a chapter closing, and that to know that you've done something that's relevant. I mean, we're all artists, and I don't, back to what we were first talking about, instantly forgotten. How much art have you created? That it's not that anybody hates it. It's not that anybody loves it. Is it even relevant? Does anybody even acknowledge it? When you find that it has been acknowledged and it is relevant to somebody so much that they're teary-eyed because it's not going to happen again, or it represents some special part of their life, that to me means more than record contracts or anything. And I did a little solo thing last Halloween where I played a couple of Dead Vampire songs and played a couple of my own, and you look out in the audience and it was the same experience. I played those Dead Vampire songs. There was people there and they were crying. They were just like, wow, and it's just like, I was able to create something that touched somebody that much. And that is the most beautiful moment in that band. I can still hear that. I can still listen to that music. For the longest time, I didn't listen to those albums. And my son found it on Google Play, and he was playing day after Halloween. He was playing the album, and he was listening to it, and he wasn't listening to it and liking it because I'm the guy on there. He was listening because he loves it.
Now, how old is your son, by the way?
He's 15.
Oh my God. I think the last time I saw you in person was like over a year ago at Crypticon with your son.
Crypticon. Yeah.
What's it like to take your son to Crypticon and introduce him to all these, cool horror things that influence you?
He's the most he is the luckiest kid I have ever met in my life. This kid has met celebrities from the Crypticon world and the Marvel universe because of these conventions. The guy that he wanted to meet there was Ray Wise.
Nice. From
Leland
Twin
Palmer.
Peaks.
But from Twin Peaks. But he didn't want to meet Leland Palmer. He wanted to meet the guy from RoboCop.
Oh my God!
Because me, like the great father I am, showed him RoboCop when he was 9 years old, and he loves that movie. But Ray Wise plays one of the baddies in RoboCop, and they were pretty brutal. Nice. Leon, I believe, is his name in the movie. But I've taken
because you have a strong bond with your son, which I appreciate.
I do, and the song on the Devil, Look What the Devil Made Me Do, is Superhero. That was a song I wrote when I was strung out and realizing that, maybe this music thing isn't going to pan out the way that I wanted it to, and maybe I'm not a rock star like I wanted to be. But this kid here, the way he looks at me and the way that we communicate, I am the biggest rock star in that kid's life. And if anything ever happened to me, it would be the end of his world. So that song was what I wrote about what I was feeling.
Well, what a lucky kid.
It's my reason to live.
But what a lucky kid to have a father like you.
Yeah. And he is the reason that I keep going on and keep moving. And I spoil the shit out of him. He gets to sit front row at Alice Cooper, and Alice Cooper gives him his cane. And I'm like, what?
That Crypticon I saw you and your son at.
Yeah.
Because they do this Twin Peaks things, the past few years. Cheryl Lee, Laura Palmer herself, was there.
I met her that year.
Yeah, me too. And I always, on principle, I've never paid a celebrity for a photo. I don't know why. I'm stuck on that because maybe I think, peer to peer, we just don't, pay for this. But she was the one and only celebrity I've ever gone up to and paid for an autograph and a photo. And it was so worth it. Because you know what? Laura Palmer Come on.
I got a picture with Laura Palmer that day too, and she spent most of her time talking to London. She was really fascinated with London, and but no, there is the whole paying for a picture thing. There is something, and I have completely fallen victim to it over the last few years. I've been like, fuck it, they got this thing now called Cameo because a lot of the musicians, they're quarantined. They're not out making money, so they do they do a private video for you and you can give it to somebody for their birthday. And Tom Savini, I paid to do Tom Savini, and he didn't only wish London a happy birthday, he showed him his studio where he works, and he showed him all these masks he's made. And
cool.
So that to me was worth I was like, this is for me. Fuck my kid. This is great.
Right. But it's a weird environment when you get into this fan worship, because you're on both sides. You want to introduce your kids to, his fans, but you're like an icon that people would probably pay you for an autograph and a photo and all that. And it's kind of weird how you kind of gauge it. And I think like with Laura Palmer, you kind of pick, okay, what's important to me? And to me, Twin Peaks and Fire Walk with Me and the Laura Palmer story was such an influential part of my creative life. Yeah, sure, I'll pay $40 for a photo. Why not?
Yeah, that's how I look at it. I mean, it's different when you go to the Comic-Con with the horror conventions and, the cameos. I pick stuff that has like extreme sentimental value. I don't just, pick some B movie actor that was kind of, no, it's got to be something special. But like the Marvel world, and for a long time, I was taking my kids to those, and you get his picture with Captain America, Chris Evans or Josh Brolin, just stuff like that. That to me is where you really kind of feel the sleaziness of it, because it's like you are waiting in line a long time, and you're in that line, and you've paid the stupidest amount of money for a picture you've ever paid for in your life, and you literally walk in there, say hello, smile, and it's done. It is literally like I would imagine it's what it feels like to give a blowjob on Aurora.
Kind of like a sleazy, a sexual, kind of semi-satisfying exchange.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, because for my kid, that's the world. When he gets a picture with Spider-Man, he's never going to forget that. But for me, I'm just kind of looking at there, because that would happen in the live sound world, or I'd be around idols. I remember one time I was in catering. I was doing Ringo Starr's All Stars at the Chateau Saint Michel. And if anybody knows me, my favorite band of all time is the Beatles.
Yeah.
And I was in catering, just having my lunch, and I heard the voice that I've grown up listening to my whole life, Octopus's Garden. It's Ringo Starr. He's like right at
his all-star band.
Yeah,
one of the members of Toto was part of his all-star band.
Oh, he had everybody. He had like Billy Squier. He had Edgar.
Billy Squier?
I want to say he had Billy Squier. He had Colin Hayes. And this is a funny story. This is how I'll always remember the day I made eye contact with Ringo Starr, and that's where it ended. Because I heard the voice and I went, oh my God, and I actually got starstruck. And that never happened. I was kind of, but it's Ringo Starr. And then he turns around and he looks at me, and I did that thing where you don't want to be a weirdo. So I stopped looking at him and directly look at Colin Hayes from Men at Work, who's got that fucked up
Oh my God,
eye.
he was playing with Ringo Starr?
He was. And
oh my God.
That's what I'll always remember, is that trying not to freak Ringo Starr out, but then getting freaked out because I'm looking directly at Colin Hayes, who's directly looking at me, and I don't know if he's directly looking at me because his eyes floating all over the fucking place, and I'm like, I need to stop beating and get out of here.
But what is it we think we will gain by locking eye contact with a famous musician? Like after the show, they'll come up and say, I locked eyes with you. Join
I
my
know
band.
exactly. What are we going to gain from going up to somebody? What are we going to tell them that they haven't heard before? I always like Mitch Hedberg's way. He tells a story of when he met Peter Frampton and he got starstruck, but he's like, what do you say to him? Hey, Peter Frampton, do you like toast? As do I. You just, what are you going to say? Oh, I love your music. Oh, I'm.
But I love that you say San Michel
Because you do, and I understand the peer thing. You want to look.
Right.
Hey, I'm a musician too.
But for people who don't know, these outdoor concerts, like the San Michel,
and
they have amazing musicians at the San Michel outdoor concerts.
Oh, they're all star act. They're all class acts that play those concert series.
I mean, who have you seen there over the years?
Oh God, I've seen Steve Miller. I saw
nice.
Gypsy Kings. I saw Huey Lewis and the News.
Nice.
I saw Moody Blues there.
Oh my God, Moody Blues! What was that like? I saw Moody Blues once in 1990, but that didn't count. But how was your Moody Blues experience?
They delivered the goods. One of my favorite albums is Days of Future Past, with all the corny poetry, cold hearted old, breathe deep, all the really ridiculous music. They did one of my favorite songs. They did Twilight Time. And they did it with all the symphony, but the symphony wasn't there, but they had like a back. It was, I had like an out of body experience. I was just like, cause I love that song. So, but they delivered the goods. Moody Blues. I saw I did a lot of jazz. Jazz isn't my bag. I'm going to say that right. Jazz is music I want to enjoy, but always fail at enjoying.
Oh my God. Well, the San Michel concerts, speaking of jazz, I saw Boz Scaggs.
Boz Scaggs, yeah.
He was good. Michael McDonald.
Michael McDonald, yeah.
Donald Fagen from Steely Dan.
Okay.
They all had their own kind of jazz-ish elements.
Yeah. That's all Chateau Saint Michel music, by the way.
And one of the most recent ones I saw was Shaka Khan.
Oh, I did sound for Shaka Khan at the Emerald Queen Casino.
Oh my God, what was she like to work with? What was she like during the sound check?
The thing about those casino gigs is there's only so many artists that you actually get to see during the sound check. The sound check is usually, you got to understand, you get there earlier, you get there before anybody, you load in gear, you deal with the backline company that's dealing with the instruments, because they're generally always renting these instruments, and you get your side of things set up, and then the crew arrives, and that's the sound engineers, and you find out whether or not you're doing sound that night or if they have their own people, and then you get everything dialed in for them, and then the band shows up. And then you're working with the band for about anywhere from 45 minutes to 4 hours. And there's only about 3 people that I can think of off the top of my head that actually show up for their sound check. Smokey Robinson.
Okay.
B.B. King.
Yeah.
And this was my favorite. I made friends with him that day. Wayne fucking Newton.
Wow.
Guy is a complete professional. Shows up, shakes your hand. Hi, I'm Wayne. We're going to be working together today. Just that whole thing, that whole Vegas thing. Wow. And I was out in the middle of nowhere casino, out in like Chehalis or something. And it was Wayne Newton. And he was the most professional, awesome guy to work with. And I worked with him all day, did the show with him. He comes up, he shakes your hand and leaves. And it's just like, that experience was worth more than the money I'm getting paid for this.
Wow. Wayne
But yeah,
Newton.
but that's how it generally with the casino circuit. It's generally a band. They show up. That's the sound check, and then Kenny Rogers shows up in a car 10 minutes before he goes on stage. Goes out there, rakes, dishes out the hits. He gets in his car right after it's over, and he's gone. And that's
Just nails it.
that's the
Smokey
reality.
Robinson. That must have been pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, all those R&B shows. I got to do Al Green. I got to do
Oh wow.
the Whispers and the
Wow.
Spinners. I did a lot of cool R&B stuff, and
Nice.
bands are always usually the best bands you work with, and really funny stories. Like Smokey Robinson. He just works with his band all day, but BB King was just sitting there noodling on his guitar. I got a really funny story about him. He's sitting there playing his guitar, and I'm actually running the monitor board for him, and he's like, "Hey, boy, can you take a little bit of the mids out of my mix?" And he's just going on while he's still playing, talking to his band. And then he said the funnest thing, that you could take a little bit more. Don't make it sound like metal, boy. This grown folks music.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
My first gig as a sound engineer, and I wasn't doing anything but patching the stage, and this will always be an honor to me, Little Richard at the Emerald Queen Casino.
Oh wow.
And I'll never forget what he says. He comes up on stage before he walks out on stage. He's got like his people with him. He's got like his posse. And they're like, "You ready, Dick?" And he's like, "Ready? I'm going to be 70 years old next week and I'm still pretty." And he goes out on stage and he freaking kills it.
Yeah.
But I've gotten to do a lot of legends in the live sound. I mean, that could all be saved for a whole other episode in the world of sound, which is a whole horror story of itself. But I know you wanted to talk about horror movies.
Well, what does it feel like when you've been the lead singer of a band and then you're like doing sound for these lead singers? What perspective does that give you?
Well, you get to see a lot of professional tips. That's what I took out most of it. Is like when you're like seeing a singer, you see what they do. And if it's like a singer that you actually respect and actually enjoy how they sing or what they're doing, you see what they do and what techniques they use to sing, because being on stage and doing that for a long time, like over 30 minutes, is really hard, especially if you want to like, trying to keep your voice in shape, if you're actually trying to sing, if you're actually trying to, make a quality show, depending on what genre you're on. I mean, I do a lot of metal bands and they're doing a quality show for what they do. And everybody has these different techniques. I learned the best technique, and I still don't follow it, is not to drink water. You want to drink water, but don't drink water while you're singing. That's it. Or if for somebody who's wanting to belt it out like I do, I'm singing from the diaphragm. I guess water screws it all up, and I still kind of fall victim to not doing that. But more importantly, what I learned out over the years of doing sound and being a sound guy, but also being passionate about the idea of pursuing music and doing that for a living, you tend to get a little bitter and a little jealous, because what happens is you realize you're working all day and you're just getting to watch somebody else come in constantly and do what you'd rather be doing. Unless you're like a passionate sound guy, which I wasn't. It's like a job that I fell into. It was exciting. I loved doing it to a point, until I realized it's like, no, I want to be on stage. I want to be out front. That's what I want to do. I want to be the singer. I don't want to be the guy behind the scenes. Because being a sound guy is really, really hard. That is some of the hardest work I've done in my life. It's not just knowing how to make a band sound good on stage or in a venue. It's physically demanding, and the hours are brutal. You're working from 6 a.m. till 2 a.m. Sleeping for a few hours and then getting up and doing it again when you're on tour or in the middle of a busy season. It's insane. It's not for the faint of heart. So I have a lot of respect for sound engineers and behind the scene folk, especially now in these troubled times, because none of them are working. And
Yeah.
heart goes out to a lot of them.
We're gonna move into our horror movie finale.
Yeah.
But before we
Finally.
do, I just want to give you one shot to tell us what albums formed you.
I think the top 3 albums that formed who I am in a nutshell are Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare.
Excellent.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band by the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
And Marilyn Manson's Antichrist Superstar.
Oh my God.
Those
really?
are like those are my trinity. That's really my trinity of albums that, as far as a mixture of songwriting, energy, and wanted to do as a musician. When I listen to A Day in the Life by the Beatles, to this day, I want and I knew this before I was 14, before I even picked up a guitar, I would just hum songs. I didn't know how to play guitar yet, but I would put on a show in my room with a tennis racket, and that was my guitar. And I would hum along and rock out to songs like A Day in the Life. And in my mind, what I was thinking is like, someday I want to write a song that does something to somebody like what this song is doing to me right now.
Wow.
That's what I want. I want them to feel what I'm feeling right now. I want to write that song. And that goes for Welcome to My Nightmare. When I, saw the show on VHS and saw Alice Cooper, and that whole stage show was like, it blew my mind. And I was like, I want to do all of that. And then I saw Marilyn Manson on the Antichrist Superstar tour in 1997, I think. It was January at the Moore Theater. I think it was coming to an end, but that was
Is he that old?
Oh, God. He's been around since the early 90s.
Oh,
he was a journalist. And he was on Trent Reznor's label. But I remember there was something really freaky about the guy. He was kind of like, unbeknownst to me, he was kind of like had this G.G. Allen kind of thing going on. But I actually picked up Antichrist Superstar when it first was released. I was in Hawaii. I was on one of my deployments, and it came out while I was in Hawaii. And that album didn't leave my CD player for about a year. I remember, because I never heard anything like it. It just completely blew my mind. And then I saw him live, and I was just like, that's rock and roll. That is the best example of rock and roll I've ever seen.
Do you think
up to that point
that he is not acknowledged for his musicianship because of the controversy?
No, I think the controversy helps him. I've always said that if you got a section of America that hates you to the point that they're deploying people with bullhorns and banners, you have done something right.
But do you think Marilyn Manson is acknowledged as a good musician the way you think he should be?
No, I think some people get it. I mean, the thing about Marilyn Manson, and it's not about, I don't think he does things just to shock people. I think he's like a true artist like Bowie or anybody in that vein who just constantly creates music. And when he makes an album, it might not be like the last one. You might not get it. It might not be your thing. But he'll do another one, and you'll hear something on there that you're like, absolutely, I get it. I like it. But there was his trilogy when he was firing on all cylinders, and I call that like the Antichrist Superstar, Mechanical Animals, Hollywood. Around that period, man, those albums were excellent, and they were just brilliant, and the music. And I think he had the right band at the time. over the years, like in many bands, people leave and there's you don't have the same musicianship, and he's basically down to writing songs himself, I think, and he doesn't have like the prowess that he had back then, but he's still pumping out really good art, and that's what I've always known about him. I can look past the controversy, and I look past it back then, and I'm like, this isn't him just trying to freak people out. This guy's just he's trying to create something, and it might be above me at the time, but I'm like, I get what this guy's doing, and the bottom line is it's energy. It's really awesome rock and roll, and I've always been entertained by it.
So when was the first time as a child you acknowledged horror movies? Like, what was the first horror movie to affect you, as a kid?
Probably the edited version of The Exorcist.
Okay.
And that was probably when I was 5, I want to say. I watched a lot.
1990?
1980.
Oh my God. Okay.
Around this period. No, I got it. Okay, I spoke too soon. The movie that had the most sentimental value, I mean, my favorite horror movie of all time is The Exorcist. But when I first watched The Exorcist, and for several years until I was 10, I could only find the version that was edited for television.
Mm-hmm.
And then we finally we went to the video store and found the actual unedited version, and then my life changed after that.
Was that the version where she walks up the stairs like a crab?
Well, that version, I always thought my mom was bullshitting me about that, because she said there was this scene when she saw it in the theaters because she saw it in the theaters when it first came out. She was 18, 17. She would tell me about that spider walk scene, and I never could find it. I never could see pictures. Back then, the internet, you had like Fangoria magazine, and that was it. Yeah. He didn't have really any way to find anything. And then they re-released that in 2000, I want to say. And I don't even think they advertised that scene was in it, but I was watching it with my mom when it came out, and that spider walk scene happened, and I went, holy shit.
Yeah.
She was full of it, But the longest time, I just saw this edited for TV, like it wasn't like, let Jesus hurt you. Let Jesus hurt you. That's
so when you
saw.
kind of came into your own was like in the 90s. So did you like watch like People Under the Stairs? What was like when you kind of became a teenager, your horror movies?
The thing with horror movies, and I can honestly say, that is a deeply ingrained love that happened when I was young, toddler, 5, 4. My mom probably wasn't being the best mother in the world, but I remember one night she woke me up at 1:00 in the morning, and I was probably 7. And she made us ham and cheese sandwiches, and we had these icy orange drinks, and we watched An American Werewolf in London at 1:00 in the morning.
Oh, nice.
Something about that whole experience with my mom. It was late. It was past bedtime, so it was like this taboo thing. And it was An American Werewolf in London, which is one of the greatest movies ever made, in my opinion.
Right, with David Naughton.
David Naughton and Griffin Dunn and Jenny Agutter. I want to say that was the first one that really had it was like, okay, I'm into horror movies. And then I remember I remember when I was at the video store, I would go to the video store when I was 8 and rent movies, and they would let me rent the R-rated movies. And I remember the first time I was going to pick out some cheesy horror movie called The Gorgon. My dad said, no, why don't we check this one out? I heard this was really good. And it was called A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I didn't know anything about it. I was 7 years old.
You were like nothing. You're a kid.
Yeah, I was 7 years old. I was 7 years old, and all I saw was a picture of Medusa, and it was this movie called The Gorgon. And I remember reaching for that. I go, we need to rent this. And my dad said, no, I've heard really good things about Nightmare on Elm Street. again, this is 1984,
Yeah.
and you don't know anything. You just pick up a movie and go, okay, let's see what happens. And I couldn't sleep for a month after that. That movie
Oh my
fucked my
God.
head up. I
Yeah.
was like, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. I was like, what? The music in that movie was so scary.
Yeah.
Robert Englund was creepy. I mean, after that, it became the franchise, and I love every one of those movies for different reasons. But that first one gave me a feeling that I rarely feel anymore, like with fear. It's just like,
It's like
holy,
when Robert Englund's hands, his arms got really big when they extended. Remember that scene? And
yeah.
the
And it's the
blades
way,
on his hands and his
the
it's like
way
arms extended. That freaked me out.
but no, I think what really scared me was the way yeah, that scene in the alley will always stick with me. But it's more of what the foreplay to that scene when she's
Mm-hmm.
just walking around, when Tina is just walking around at night and it's dark, and you just keep hearing that Tina. That that fucked with me. I don't know what it was about that. And then the gruesome way that she winded up dying, and when
Yeah.
Nancy is visited in the school and she's in a body bag. These are all just visuals that, today's standards you're not supposed to let kids see. And it did a number on me just downloading all that haunting imagery onto my pristine hard drive.
Yeah. Well,
But no,
since
Nightmare on Elm.
then, as an adult, you're able to see more of the horror classics. So what other horror movies, made an impact on you?
God, I've didn't, it's like I've gone through so many different phases with horror movies, and I watch every year at certain periods of the year. I religiously watch a lot of the franchises. Like I like watching Jaws around 4th of July because
Mm-hmm.
it's live. I like watching Friday the 13th in the summer because it's summer camp. And I religiously watch every one of these movies every year. And I don't know what I get out of it. I like to quiz myself. The thing is in all those movies, some of them are really bad, but I see something new that I haven't seen before. You discover new stuff. But the original Friday the 13th was actually really well done for what it
Mm-hmm.
was. The Halloween movies, the original Halloween is
Mm-hmm.
a force to be reckoned with. I mean, I can only imagine what it was like to see that when it first came out.
And then those were
And
great and kind of slasher. What were
yeah,
the horror movies with more of a mask, more of a monster, more of, what was the dead vampires inspiration?
um,
Like Phantom of the
prosthetic.
Paradise or
Yeah, I would probably go Phantom of the Paradise. Just that whole rock opera
Mhm.
aspect. Maybe if you could remember the movie Trick or Treat
Oh
with
yeah.
Sammy Kerr, and it had Skippy from Family Ties and Ozzy. But Phantom of the Paradise had a major impact on me. Brian De Palma. That was it was a rock opera, and
Yeah.
it dives into something very important in that movie that I've always been fascinated by, and that's the history of rock and roll. The band that plays throughout that movie is the Juicy Fruits, and they transform into all these different versions of rock and rolls through the years. They go from the 50s car crash songs to the surf rock to the shock rock. They go through all those different things, and those are that the history of rock and roll is always something to me that I love, and I constantly am trying to learn more about. But Phantom of the Paradise, that definitely was one of the big ones. Movies that scared the hell out of me that didn't have anything to do with it. I remember the original Pet Cemetery. I don't
I
know.
love that. I love that movie.
I remember I was 13 when I saw that. So I'm not a kid anymore, but I am. But that movie had a lot of disturbing images in it, and the music at the beginning, I think it's Alan Goldberg who does the score. Goldman, I don't know.
Or how
it-
about the Ramones?
oh yeah, you had Ramones, yeah, and that turned me on to my which I think is one of the
I
greatest
don't
American
wanna get buried in a pet
cemetery.
cemetery.
But no, that movie had a lot of frightening visuals. A lot of things that scared the hell out of me. I never seen a kid get killed on screen except in like Pumpkinhead, you know, and the
Don't you
devastating
think
effect.
the original was so much better than the remake?
I do. I don't think the original. I don't know. There was something that didn't translate because I know the original didn't get mind blowing reviews, but that original and it even spawned a sequel that I'm sure Stephen King has disowned. But I don't know. I like that whole Pet Cemetery universe that Mary Lambert, I
Stephen
believe, is
King
the director.
cashed the paycheck.
What's that?
Stephen King cashed the paycheck.
Oh, he did. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's not. I'm sure he bitched and moaned about his movie all the way to the bank. There's a lot of great Stephen King films that have been adapted, and I'm real. It's a shame, and I'm sure it was just a time. But one of probably my third favorite movie of all time is The Shining, and I just spent the evening last month at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado, where that movie was basically conceived. The Shining. It's a modern horror masterpiece, and that movie's been with me my entire life. It's one of the creepiest movies I've seen.
Have you shared that with your son?
Yes, I remember. I had a moment in my life when this was about a year. So he was about 10. Me and my ex-wife, we always agreed that we wouldn't let my son watch horror movies until he was 10. And when he was 10, he didn't want to watch horror movies. It was weird. He was kind of like, he was fascinated by them at first, and then he never really wanted to watch them. And it took him a while to really get into the swing of it, because one night I was cooking dinner and he wanted Shining, and I put it on and I said, sure, yeah, this is one of the greatest movies ever made. This is Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick was a photographer before, I always give him the long history lesson of everything I watch. He's like, just play the movie, Dad. And it got to the scene with the woman in the bathtub, and I was in the kitchen and I was just watching him from the living room because I knew it was going to have an effect on him. But as soon as I heard that laugh and that, I looked over and he had his face buried in his hands, and he has never been able to get that scene out of his mind. It still haunts him to this day. It's weird. That woman fucked his day up.
What are the scenes you saw in horror movies that you can't get out of your head?
There's a scene, one of the most haunting scenes that at times keeps me up at night. It's from The Exorcist, and it's when Father Karras is leaving the McNeil residence, and he asks Chris, he's like, did Reagan know that someone was coming over tonight? And Chris is like, well, no. Did she know that did she know, or no, he asks if she knew that his mother had just recently passed away. And Chris goes, well, no. And he's like, no, did your daughter know that my mother just recently passed away? And Chris McNeil goes, no, there's no reason she would know that. And he's like, it doesn't matter. Good night. And that's at that moment, you can see in his face, he knows that he is not dealing with something from this earth. and he walks away from the residence, and the detective is out on the street, like casing the place, and he looks up in the room where he looks up in Reagan's bedroom, and he just sees a shadow of a little girl hovering across the window. That silhouette, that scene haunts me for so many reasons, because not only is it creepy, but it makes that movie even scarier in the sense that that's on a regular street in a regular town, and that is what's going on up in that room. I don't know. There's just a weight to that has always really, really creeped me out. And then just recently, Hereditary. I saw Hereditary. That director, man, he knows how to get inside your head, because he put a couple of scenes in. The Hereditary. I don't want to do any spoilers, but God, there's a few scenes in that. He captures the emotion of grief all too well. Have you seen Hereditary?
No, but for people who don't like horror or don't understand it or don't expose themselves, what would be your advice to say why they should expose themselves to horror? Because I think it does have value to people.
Yeah, it's think the thing with horror, it's like we were talking about, the why does the good girl always go for the bad boy? You know, there's that taboo there, and that's what horror movies are. They, depending on what the horror movie is, maybe some people just look at it as, maybe it's just too fake for them. It's like, this isn't reality. There's not a serial killer out there with a hockey mask, where people like me, we like the novelty of that. I like the experience I've had, with Jason and Freddy Krueger throughout my life. It's the sentimental value attached to those characters and my childhood, and even now as a grown man. It's more interesting to me than someone who may not have experienced a horror movie at that precise window in their life. I think there's always like this window where if you experience certain music, certain movies, it has an effect on you at that certain time in your life that it won't have the same effect if you were like 10 years older or 10 years younger. It's just, you got to experience it at that window. And I think for a lot of people, they weren't really turned on to horror movies. It just, maybe their parents didn't let them watch it. Maybe they just never found anything interesting about them, and it just doesn't have it. But what I like are the movies that really can dig into your soul and find what really scares you. And when you can find what really scares someone, and it goes back to what I was talking about with music. When you write a song that actually moves someone, and it's not a fake, like, oh, that was a good song, man. No, when you've like hit a nerve with somebody, whether it's with your music or horror movies, that's powerful. Maybe some people are afraid of experiencing that. Maybe people don't like, there's people that do not want to be scared. They don't like that anxiety. They don't like that feeling it gets. I'm fascinated by the psychology of why this movie, which I know is made by producers and directors and screenwriters and actors, but once it's all assembled, I have this experience that scares the living shit out of me, and it still does today. It still, as a grown guy, I can watch something and it'll freak me out. Like I just mentioned, the movie Hereditary, Midsummer. There's this new director, and he's really tapping into a really scary place that I haven't seen in movies for the past 2 decades. You had the torture porn movies for a while that were really hot. You had the decade where they were rebooting all my beloved classics. They rebooted Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. They rebooted like every 80s slasher movie. But I was paying money to see every damn one of them. And then you kind of went into that, it kind of went into a really weird area where it was like movies like High Tension and The Descent. You know, it was a little bit more sophisticated, but filmmaking today, they're really doing a thing where they can go deep and scare the hell out of you and not show gore. They don't have to show gore. They don't have to show violence even. They just tap into a weird nerve that scares the hell out of you. And I don't know how they do it, but I'm always experienced. So my advice is just like give it a shot. But some people just aren't interested. Like I say, people have the attention spans of goldfish, and it's hard to get them to steer on something that they'd be interested in. You know, it's like I think most people would rather watch Dr. Phil. You know, I don't know what people do. I sit here every Halloween and I go through all the Universal classic horror movies. You know, Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolf Man, Invisible Man. I watch those, and those are amazing. I like to try and imagine what it would be like to be in 1933 and go to the theater and see Dracula. What would that have been like if I was, you know, what made it so scary then? What would it be like to be in 1969 and you and your buddy from the military, or, you know, have a couple of days off and you walk by a movie theater and you see Night of the Living Dead? Wonder what that's like. You know, you don't have the internet. You don't have anything to tell you. You're just like walking around going, hey, you want to go see Night of the Living Dead? That sounds cool. And then you go in there and it completely fucks your head up because you've never seen anything like that. I'm sure you've heard the story from somebody who saw Night of the Living Dead the first time when it first came out. Everybody was traumatized.
As an aside, are you a foodie?
Somewhat.
What's
You
your
know what?
go-to?
No.
What's your go-to dinner when you're trying to impress a first date?
Chicken Parmesan.
Are you
Or
Italian?
I like going to a steak. No, you know, yeah. That was like the one thing I liked. I like going to a nice Italian place and getting the chicken Parmesan. These days, I'm a steak guy, man. I go to the best steakhouse I can find, and it's just a carnivorous experience. And
And
I
if a
just eat like a
girl is
bear.
a vegan, is that a deal killer?
No, I'm just gonna say, well, you're gonna be bored a lot watching me eat like a bear at the dump.
All right,
Oh,
we're going to go into our final stretch here. 3 final questions for you.
three final
Then
questions.
we'll wrap it up. But this first one is a really important question. Okay.
I'll try not to go off track.
What is your favorite horror movie of all time and why?
Favorite horror movie of all time would be the 1973 classic directed by William Friedkin, The Exorcist.
Please elaborate.
It is my favorite movie due to the time it was made. The 70s, I think, is one of the greatest decades for filmmaking. That movie, to this day holds up. It's almost 50 years old. It's a almost 50-year-old movie, and it still scares me. That I don't know what creates power like that. When you make a movie like that, I don't know if it's because it's been with me my whole life, but when I hear the first tones, when I start the movie, you see the Warner Brothers print, and I hear the first sounds, I get a chill. It goes. I get that freaked out anxiety because I'm about ready. And I've seen The Exorcist over 100 times, probably more, and it still really scares. But it's not even just the scariness of it. It's just how everything is orchestrated through that movie. The music that they use, it's very subtle, but when they do it, it's right. It needs to be there. And the acting is superb. Everything about that film is what makes a perfect horror movie for me, because it goes. I love all horror movies. I love the classic horror movies. I love the Hammer films. I love the slashers of the 80s. I like the more sophisticated 90s horror movies. I love the reboots, but that movie taps into something that none of those other movies can tap into. I don't know what it is. if it was a sex partner, it was the one that gave me the best orgasm I'd ever have in my life and ever will.
So, what is your favorite rock band of all time and why?
The Beatles. The Beatles are my favorite rock band because their music throughout all their albums, throughout everything they've done, has created more sentimental value to me. I have more just good memories and just good um, stuff tied to them because they were truly like the genesis of me wanting to be a songwriter. And everything they've done is different. They were doing things that were even dreamed of when they were. I can't imagine what it would be like to be the Beatles in the late '60s. I can only fantasize what that would be like. But that music holds a lot of weight for me. Past all the metal, all the horror rock, all the shock rock, it all comes down to one. It's like you think of all these movies that are made or rock bands are made and where they all come from, but it comes down to one band for me. And the Beatles, I wouldn't be doing anything that I'm doing now if it wasn't for them. And they're my favorite rock band of all time. And I call the Beatles a rock band.
You've had all these influences. You've got to exercise your own artistic abilities in bands, and you're actually not too old. So you got maybe what, 30, 40 good years left in your life. How would you like to spend those years expressing yourself creatively?
I want to fall in love with making music again. I've had a long break from it. Like I said, I've spent the last couple of years doing tribute bands and having a lot of fun doing music. But, I mentioned, it's fun being in a tribute band and playing in front of a crowd as opposed to when you play your original music and you're playing in front of 5 people. But I remember a time, and I think it was around the time when I was in Dead Vampires, when I was madly in love with making music. And I couldn't write enough songs. And I don't know what I was tapped into at the time, but I desperately wanted to tap into that again. And I've been trying for years. You get older, you get more responsibilities. You got to pay the bills, you do different things, but there's nothing like writing a song. There's nothing like that moment. I've written like maybe 60 songs in my life, and I'll say 5 of them are really, really good. And when I'm in this living room and I finish that song and it's just me in here and I finish that one special song, I've done a lot of drugs in my life. I've skydived. I've done a lot of fun stuff, but nothing matches that feeling of when you finish a song that you're in love with, and you just hear it. You haven't played it for anybody yet. You're just in that moment with yourself. And I desperately, desperately want to do that again.
When's the last time you wrote a song?
I write songs all the time. I just don't really promote them anymore. They come in spurts, I'm not here playing my guitar every day, but I've gotten about like 10 songs that nobody's heard, and maybe 2 of them are really, really, really good. It's just a matter of, just going to that next level. But, there's a lot that goes into, the process of recording a song. I need to get to a point where I'm not concerned with who's listening or who's going to like it or what. I just need to do it just to do it for me, because you get kind of let down. You put all this effort into something, and this isn't just me. This is a lot of my bandmates, colleagues, and friends. You put your heart and soul into something and you throw it out in the world, and it's like you mentioned, it's instantly forgotten. And then you're just kind of like, okay, well, now what? It's kind of like getting a picture with the celebrity at the Comic-Con. You put all this effort into it, you wait in line, you pay a lot of money. Oh shit, there he is, he's there. Snap, instantly forgotten.
Do
I
you
need to get to know.
feel some sentimentality with dead vampires now?
What's that?
Do you feel some sentimentality with dead vampires?
Oh, very much. One of the most that was one of the most special times of my life. I truly it is in the highlight of my life, one of the high points. I've never been more creative. I don't know that I've ever had much more fun. I'm not going to lie, it was also a hell. It was also a hard time. You learn about, you know, things happen in a band. You guys are all like aspiring to do something great, and everybody goes in different directions, and a lot of weird things happen along that road, and it gets weird and uncomfortable, but you just keep plugging away. And those moments that I had on stage, they're priceless. I'll never get to experience that again. That was one of the greatest times of my life. I remember at Matt's funeral. you know I'd been there all day. We'd met all the, we'd spent time with family, friends, just all these people over the years that we were in this silly little band together. And, we were leaving the funeral parlor, and Spanky looked at me. We both had tears in our eyes, and he's like, this was truly the best time of our life. And he
You
was
know,
right.
for
It was.
people who are 20 or 30 and think life ends at 30, you've got a lot of life left in you. Do you think your most creative times are ahead of you?
I hope so. I know I have it in me. It's just a matter of me getting over caring who wants to listen to it and just doing it. That's all it takes.
And if you kind of sum up everything in your creative life, what's the theme of your music and your creative output?
I think the theme of it all, it's, it all comes from love for me. It's all just, it might be disguised in a Dracula cape or something. If I'm talking about Frankenstein, I'm talking about a monster I've created. If I'm talking about Dracula, I'm probably talking about something that's sucking the life out of me. But it all generally falls back into me just like a unrequited love. That's where it all. I like writing love songs. I like writing sweet little songs, because that to me has always been one of the most powerful emotions, is when you genuinely love someone. Aside from being scared, you know, from like a horror movie or something, or just life in general, that anxiety you feel like, oh, am I going to get fired from my job today? Or what am I going to come home to tonight? Or, stupid shit like that. But love has always been kind of at the root of it all. And that's probably why the Beatles are one of my favorite bands. They got all kinds of different types of music, different types of songs, but there's this essence of love underneath it all, and I believe in that. I'm It's always really been a big ingredient to any song I write, whether it's like a love for my life, or a love for another human being, or a love for my son, a love for my girlfriend or my ex-wife, anything. It could be anything, but it's the most powerful ingredient that I've always had, and I've kind of stuck to it.
In the end, people think you're in a band, you have groupies, and, it's like you're, who are these 80s rock bands, You're like
Motley Crue.
Motley Crue with girls throwing themselves at you. But in the end, when you're in a band, isn't it much more about your solidarity with the other guys in the band?
It is, and you lose, and it's really easy to lose track of that, um, because girls do. It's part of the program, just like drugs and sex. All of that is part of the program. When you enter the world of rock and roll, or you want to enter the world, you may think that women are throwing themselves at you, but they might not. But those things are all distractions. It is about the solidarity of the band and what you're creating, because it feels good when you're singing to a girl, and they're singing your song back. They're singing your song back to you. They're singing lyrics you wrote back to you. That's a pretty good feeling. But at the end of the day, all that kind of just gets in the way. And that's what kind of breaks a lot of bands up. You got to be in a band, if you want a band to be successful. If there's anybody in their younger stages that are listening to this, I would say, if you're in a band with 5 people and 4 of you want to be rock stars and one guy is just doing it to have fun, you need to get rid of the guy who's just there to have fun, because being a rock star a lot of the time isn't fun, or trying to be one, I should say. There's days where it could be further from fun. And it goes vice versa. If you're in a band with 4 guys that are just trying to have a good time, write music and just have a laugh, but you got one guy in there that's trying to be a rock star, you need to get rid of that rock star pronto and get another guy in there that wants to have fun. And everybody will be happy. Once you put that one element in there, it gets kind of ugly.
Doc, do you want to have fun, or do you want to be a rock star?
These days, I just want to have fun. I want to have fun until the day I die. If I could have fun being a rock star, oh God, that'd be great. But I think I think that boat sailed. I am perfectly okay with having fun. And you know what? I do have fun. I do. Sincerely.
You've shared very candid experiences, and I want to give you the last word. No agenda, no parameters, just to say out there to potential fans, potential rock stars, at this stage in your life, what's the big pearl of wisdom you can share with people that, has real meaning to you?
Put your love into the ones that put their love into you. That was one of my lyrics in Desert Bride. You put all your love in the ones that ignore you, and you slam the door on the one that adored you. And that's kind of the mantra in my life now. It's like I think a lot of people spend all this time trying to impress people, that their art or anything that they're trying to do, the running theme in this conversation, they put all this effort into people that unfortunately what you're trying to impress them with is instantly forgotten. But somebody is actually paying attention to you, and that's the one that you need to shower with your art, your love, whatever. Yeah. Pay attention, put your love in the ones that put their love into you, and slam the door on those other guys, because at the end of the day, that's where your regrets are. Is like, you think about all those people that were there singing your songs, or they were there supporting you, and unfortunately a lot of the time those are the ones we ignore, and we're putting all our effort into trying to impress this other entity, and you're ignoring your number one fan. So if there's any advice I have, is focus on that number one fan. They're the reason you're doing it.
Have you found love in your life?
Yes, I am madly in love with my girlfriend. We've been together for 10 years. She is the muse behind my song 21st Century Fox. And we have been through hell together, but we've been holding each other's hand every step of the way. And, we're very happy together now. Yeah, Lana's, she's like she's my Pamela to my Jim Morrison. I can't imagine my life without her. And then, like I've mentioned, the love for my son, there's no love I'll ever have for anything like the love I have for him. And my whole mission in life is to make sure that he has a happy one. I want him to have a good life. I don't want him to have like a negative attitude or fall into the same crap that I did, because at the end of the day, it's all a waste of time and potentially dangerous. So I want to be there for him and make sure that he goes through this life grinning like an idiot.
Well, for people who want to know more about you and your creative life, is there a way they can, seek you out online?
The music, everything I've ever written and recorded is all available on dalefall.bandcamp.com. And if you want to know anything about my life, you can find me on Facebook and send me a message. I'm very easily accessible.
I like that. Okay, last question. Allman Brothers or Leonard Skinner?
Oh, that's a rough one. Allman Brothers.
Absolutely. No
Whipping
question.
Post.
Come on. Allman Brothers, of course.
Their song Whipping Post to me is more valuable than the entire Leonard Skinner collection. But that's just a personal opinion.
Well,
but anyways, yeah, I hope that you got everything and more that you wanted from this interesting little journey into my psyche.
I think I could take the next 50 years psychoanalyzing you, Doc. But
well,
this
buy the ticket, take a ride.
Sliver. I see this as a sliver of your life. Okay?
It is.
You're a multifaceted man. I just want to think that you got a lot of creativity left that you're going to act upon for the rest of your life.
I definitely plan on doing that and hope so.
Maybe some acting.
I would love to be an actor. That's the one thing I've ignored. I was just talking about, you put all your energy into that entity that's not really paying you off, when really you're ignoring your number one fan. And you know what? Maybe things would be a lot different because acting has always been that other thing that I've always wanted to do. I just didn't have the guts to move to Hollywood and pursue it head on. That is the main reason I chose music, because it was more convenient. I was like, I'm in Seattle, I live here, I don't have to move. Because it would have been one or the other. I would have loved to have pursued acting. I was in play production. I was a drama nerd. I'm very theatrical, as you know, and I would have loved to have pursued that. But things might be way different now. I don't know how,
but you take direction well.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't involve me putting a penis in my mouth. Not that I have anything against that.
Oh, well, you left me speechless. I think, though, with you, sometimes we don't realize our strengths, and you have a natural you're very natural on camera, because I've seen you on camera, and you have this natural ability to just relax and ease into a role.
Yeah, I would love to be.
And it does not involve gay porn.
Yeah, that's always been my biggest fear is if I ever took like a acting gig like via a Craigslist ad and you wind up in some you're in just some room, you're there, you're ready to, just really give it your all, and then they're just staring at you and they're like, okay, this is the time when you get undressed. You're like,
I
okay.
think the rule of thumb is don't take a role over Craigslist.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do that.
Although,
But
although
no,
although I will say that's probably where I've gotten some of my best actors. But
I like how I wound up in your in the Mephisto box. I
you're
I,
amazing.
I showed up in just I thought I was doing a dead vampires interview, and you're just like, okay, so here's your role and here's your wig.
And what was
And I'm up on
amazing
the top of the
is
Rainier brewery.
the Rainier Brewery in 28-degree weather.
Yes, it was freezing cold, but I
Freezing.
love that. I love that memory. That was I hold that memory. That was a very cool day.
That's
Just
an
the whole
amazing day.
everything.
Yeah.
I love that day. And I think that's what's fun about filmmaking. That, I haven't been on a lot of film sets, or, I've not really been in that world. But I think that would be the more exciting thing about making a movie, other
Mhm.
than what may potentially come after it's finished, is those experiences you find yourself in making a movie. I used to make movies in high school. I used to direct all my friends at the weird hours and make these little horror movies. And like you documented in Hush Hush Sweet Hush Hush Nellie Olson, the cops get called. I had the cops called on me,
Yeah.
and it's
It's
those.
amazing. You're just making a little movie,
And you
and
turn around
suddenly
and
the
there's
cops show
cops.
up.
Yeah, and it's like you can't write that into a movie. One of my favorite
But I think
documentaries
we
is
were working on top of the Rainier Tower, and it was like 28 degrees,
uh-huh.
kind of like the show must go on. And even though like your
Yeah,
body is shutting down because you're so damn cold, you just got to get the footage.
right.
And I
And
think that discipline,
oh
whether it's music, a band, showing up for a gig, making a movie, a true artist, they'll like come, close to death to get their footage.
yes, they will. And that's yeah, I've done that. I've gotten shocked on stage, and I've gone through all kinds of pains and things to make sure that you get through the show. The show must go on. You can't stop. There's no crying in baseball. You're there. I totally get that, and I honestly think that energy I hold. I would do well as an actor. I would totally maybe I could be one of those actors that started late, like one of those older actors that got started way late in the game. I don't know. That might be my calling. Because I love film. God knows I love it. But the one thing I think I love most about film is it's a world that I haven't explored the behind the scenes really. It's like in the music business, I've been a live sound guy. I've seen the wizard behind the curtain. I've been to the circus. Movies still have that magic to me. They
It's
still
almost
have that.
like a
They,
Cirque du Soleil thing. There's just
yeah.
something about taking a physical risk. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And then I have a lot of admiration for people who take a risk for their art, whether it's physical, mental, intellectual. Because let's face it, we're all armchair quarterbacks. All
We
these
are.
people online judging other people, they none of them have the balls to actually put themselves on the line and do something creative.
Yeah.
I mean, who could
It
do
takes a lot,
what you've
and
done?
that's one thing.
I mean, dead vampires Who on this
Yeah,
planet duplicate that, you know?
yeah, who could do that? Who could get 5 guys in a room, grown men, dressing up in Halloween costumes, prosthetics, makeup, fucking and get up there and truly put on a rock and roll performance to the best of our ability in the sleaziest of conditions. I mean, not
Oh
a
my
lot of people
God,
can
in
do
like
that. It's
a 4 by 5 foot stage the size
yeah,
of a postage stamp.
exactly. And you have you have in the crowd that love it. You have people there that can't stand looking at you. I mean, that's the good thing. That's what I always tell about a lot of people about bands is when you're in a band, because everybody obviously wants to be loved or they want to be hated or whatever. It's like if everybody loves you, you're doing something. I go if everybody loves you, you're doing something wrong. If everybody hates you, you're doing something wrong. You got to find that happy medium. If if you've got a fan base, but there's people that just can't stand you, you are on the right track. I think it's the yin and the yang. I think you have to have that balance. It's when people don't give a shit. And I it's the reference I have is because people say, "Man, I got too many haters," or yeah, "There's all my haters." You want that. You want to have those because if you hate somebody, they're you are on their mind. They're
Yeah.
thinking about you. So you've made an impact. And I
Do
think that's
do you
very
always want to
important
keep
when you have a people that could,
do you always want to keep a little punk rock in whatever you do?
absolutely. I like and punk rock is I don't necessarily think it's music. Punk rock is an attitude, and I hold on to it very dearly to this day. And it's just a basically don't take shit from no one attitude. I work in the blue, and you work around people that are from way different walks of life that I find very interesting. Uh, I work around a bunch of Larry the Cable and it is what it is. And I like having that attitude. I like having that attitude. Like, what the fuck up with this guy? That
Yeah.
that's a. I like having that attitude. I also like people I don't think you're supposed to get along with.
Do you
So
think
there's the
you'll ever put
punk
out
rock.
another solo CD?
Oh yeah, I absolutely think I'll do that. I don't know when, but I know I have the music in me. I like the idea of putting out a single. I think, like I've mentioned, I don't think people have the attention span anymore to handle more than a couple of songs. I'm recording 2 songs and making it like an A and a B side, like the old days.
Yeah.
Whereas instead of like vomiting 14 new songs, I don't know anybody in the world that I could give 14 songs to and they would honestly listen to it from beginning to end. People have the attention span for a song, maybe 2. And I mean, that first song that you share, it's got to be amazing in the first. You have to have something going on in the first 5 seconds, because if something doesn't hold their interest, they're going to be staring at their phone.
I don't know why I'm really good at this, but I actually forgot to hit record once. I did like a 2-hour interview and it was lost. That's really pathetic.
Those are my. I hate to say this, but in the medium of any like entertainment or recording or anything, I've never gotten tired of the story where somebody didn't hit the record button and that magic is gone.
Oh my god. And I should have come clean with the person. And I just kind of had this convoluted story and blah blah blah. I don't know what are these even? What do you call this data when it's like a digital audio recording?
I call it oral air pudding.
What's that thing in Terminator, the big massive corporation that controls everything?
Skynet.
So this is just we're basically a pawn of Skynet.
That's all we are, man.
It's
This
just
is
all
all
going
just
into
going.
Skynet's database so that the droids can take us over.
And then one day when we realize that there's something mirroring us in everything that we do and say, and we're going to wonder why. And it's, oh, wait, no, that already happens on Facebook. There's a
Exactly. Oh,
microphone on our devices that hears everything we say.
we're
How did
really
they?
stupid, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, you know, why not? Just give a, you know, how I think that was one of my favorite lines in the movie Ghost World was just give people a Big Mac and a pair of Nikes and they're happy.
Oh, I love that. We talked about that on my podcast about Steve Buscemi.
Yeah, I love him in that film.
If you acted in something, could you be a villain?
I
Yeah.
would relish in it. I would chew the scenery. I could
Yeah.
easily be the bad guy.
I'm going to
I
ponder
could be
that.
very evil and cruel or explore things that you think are cruel. Yeah, it's like how far can you take this? How far are you cuz the thing that I think as actors what I think they go through is, I mean, we all feel these feelings and you go to a certain place where you're like, okay, that's not who I am. You know, this is, you know, that feeling is definitely something I'm not comfortable with because I don't feel that. But being an actor and this is your role, you have to bypass that and take it as far as you can. How cruel and evil can you be? You know, what kind, yeah, that's acting. That's what that is. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, be like be like, oh, I'm the evil. I'm like the Joker in the 1960s Batman TV series. I'm conducting jolly capers around Gotham, and they're kind of fun, but I'm evil and I'm a prankster. Or no, what if you're really like the Joker?
But for your true final, speaking directly to people, we've gone through 2020 with COVID-19, quarantines, and whatnot. And I just want you to share with everyone, and this is our true finale. We're going to wrap up here. Give everyone a little bit of hope, but also say, don't panic. Use this time to do this. How should we use COVID time to kind of build ourselves up and maybe explore our creative lives?
Everybody has different circumstances that they're stuck in through this very challenging year. I've seen friends that were very successful in their trade suffer all year. They don't have a job and they're not going to have one anytime soon. I've seen a lot of horror stories over the last 9 months. I've seen people turn into absolute monsters based on the fear of what we're all experiencing here. Like I said, we all are in different situations. You know, what I would suggest is, you got to go to the places that aren't negative. For me, I've had some time off the last couple of months. I've been fortunate to work all year, and I'll I've had 2 months off, and I've been fortunate enough to still quarantine. And I live in a part of the world up here in the state of Washington that I haven't really explored, and that's all I've spent my time doing is out hiking in the mountains. And I'm not a hiker. I've never done that in my life. And you get your head straight out there when you get away from your phone and the social media and all the shit. When you just go out in the middle of nowhere and you just cruise nature, that has completely helped me. Some people don't leave the house. Um, that's your that's then you have no excuse not to be creative. That's something that I should be doing. I have, had a couple of days here where I haven't had anywhere to go, and that was my opportunity to, construct some new music. But I have chosen to do things that I haven't done before in my life, and I think that's if people bypass, if they can get out of their house, if they have the means, then yeah, this is the time to, you know, go explore places that you haven't gone to that are still safe or as safe as you allow it to be. I mean, a lot of it I think could be built up in people's mind as far as how scared they are to. I mean, I've never experienced anything like this in my life, and nor has anybody else. But there's different levels of fear that everybody have attached to this, and I think a lot of it is tied to news and media. And I think the longer I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong, obviously, with being informed, but I think it can get you to a point where you're basically scared to leave your own apartment, and I think that's a little extreme. So I would just say, don't let that. Some people, I'm sure, are just tickled pink not to have to leave their apartment. They're like, this is paradise. But if anybody's getting that claustrophobic feeling like I do, I go do things I've never done before, like hiking, and it's really simple, easy stuff. And that's the best thing I do. Try to find salvation in other avenues that you may not have explored until they get this thing in some form under some form of control. Like I said, I've been fortunate. Everybody has a different situation. I've chosen not to spend a lot of time watching the news, social media, all of that. You got to put that stuff down and just really go out to where there's no noise and just your own head and get that all straight. And then you might figure out a way to deal with these troublesome times in a more positive way.
His name is Dale Fall. I call him Doc. The FBI calls him Brian. He's the lead singer of Dead Vampires, featured in the upcoming documentary Spanky Was a Punk Rocker. I thank you for being on the show, and I really expect some big things from you in this next Oprah chapter of your life.
I expect big things from me too, and thank you so much for having me on. This was awesome.